Chapter 35-47. When she opened her eyes, she saw Gu Jinglian's head resting gently on her shoulder. His warm breath kept brushing against her cheeks. For a moment, she felt as if all the air that entered her lungs was coming from him. The breath that he exhaled seemed to be slightly hot. She only felt that her face was suddenly burning red. Instinctively, she pushed him, but his body did not move. He hugged her so tightly that she had the illusion that she was his most precious treasure. Chu Ho's expression became more and more unnatural. She saw that Gu Jinglian's breathing was heavy. It was probably because he had been too tired in the past few days that he fell into a deep sleep. She did not know when he had fallen asleep, so she could not bear to wake him up. Chu Ho closed her eyes and planned to rest for a while more. Suddenly, there was a shocking explosion at the entrance of the cave. The ear-piercing sound was deafening. Her ears were suddenly ringing from the explosion. Gu Jinglian also woke up instantly. He raised his head and heard a soft rustling sound coming from the entrance of the cave. Someone's coming. Chu Ho also reacted. She immediately stood up, picked up the submachine gun from the ground, and crouched in the corner. Gu Jinglian covered the entrance of the cave and held his breath vigilantly. However, the soft rustling sound outside the cave suddenly went far away. They did not seem to have noticed the entrance of the cave that was covered by the bushes. Immediately after, they heard the rumbling sound of tanks passing by outside the cave. Chu Ho carefully walked to the entrance of the cave. She pushed the bushes aside and looked outside. However, she saw several helicopters hovering in the sky above the coconut grove. The fog was thick, and visibility was extremely low. The huge leaf fans were making a desperate sound. "We should go," Gu Jinglian said. "Let's go now." Chu Ho nodded. Gu Jinglian asked nervously, "Can you walk on your own?" "Yes, I'm fine." After sleeping for a few hours, the pain of the wound had subsided a lot. She walked over and carried the combat bag. Gu Jinglian walked over, woke Lin Shi up, and gave him a gun. If they left this place, they might be ambushed by the rebel army at any time. It was impossible for him to carry him, so he could only do his best to cover him. However, even if he was a child, he still needed to carry a weapon with him under such circumstances. But Lin Shi said, "It's okay. I know how to use a gun." Growing up in such an environment, he knew how to use guns and basic self-defense. Gu Jinglian gave him a few more magazines. Lin Shi kept the magazines close to his body, and the three of them left the cave. Just as they walked out of the cave, the loud sound suddenly became clearer. Bullets rained down in front of him. Gu Jinglian covered Lin Shi while Chu Ho followed behind him. One of them charged forward while the other had his back to Gu Jinglian to observe the situation behind them and provide cover. The three of them ran wildly in the rain of bullets. The clamor was accompanied by the sound of AK shots, and the tragic sound of gunfire reverberated in their eardrums. Gu Jinglian gave the only helmet to Lin Shi. 3 heavy bullets hung on his shoulders, 3 guns on his back, and a heavy Gatling gun in his hands. He ran at the front to open up a path. His pace was calm and fast. He turned back to estimate the distance and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Fire!" Chapter 35-48. The two of them cooperated well. At this moment, someone seemed to have discovered their deliberate trail, so they threw an infrared time grenade at them. Chu Ho saw it at a glance. This grenade took about 10 seconds to detonate. Chu Ho immediately walked over and kicked the grenade away. Gu Jinglian raised his AK-47 and fired a bullet, directly detonating the grenade. Chu Ho turned around and pushed Lin Shi to the ground. A scorching wave rushed over and brushed past their backs. Behind them, a huge cluster of flames rose, accompanied by heart-wrenching screams. It formed a towering wall of fire about 100 meters long in the coconut forest. Chu Ho struggled to support her body. She turned her head and glanced back. She saw several tanks passing through the ferocious fire and slowly approaching. The wave of air swept over violently. The tanks crossed the line of fire, and more than a dozen soldiers rushed down. Gu Jinglian had a long string of bullets on his shoulder, and his face was covered in sweat. He carried the extremely heavy Gatling gun and fired fiercely at the team behind him. Chu-ho held the XM-109 sniper rifle, and blood-white hot liquid sprayed endlessly at the edge of the forest. She didn't know how many people she had shot, but she vaguely felt that she had returned to her former mercenary career. As long as there was a bullet left, she would continue to slaughter lives. Several laser beams quickly scanned the forest. These were special instruments to detect life and electronic equipment. Gu Jinglian recognized them immediately. He gritted his teeth, nimbly turned over, and pulled off all the radio communication equipment on himself and Chu-ho, and threw them into the distance. The laser beam's positioning was messy. With a boom, a guided missile hit the position where the radio was thrown. Gu Jinglian grabbed Chu-ho's hand. Chu-ho directly hugged Lin Shi in her arms and rushed into the forest, temporarily obtaining cover. Chu-ho felt for the straw in her collar and hurriedly drank 2 mouthfuls of water. There wasn't much water stored in her jacket. She didn't even have time to add purification powder. The smell of water made her retch. But in this situation, there was no time to care so much. We're still 10 miles away from the signal tower. Gu Jinglian paused for a moment. The signal base station was built by Werther, so it's very safe. The communication equipment inside is more complete. After we go in, we'll send out a signal and shield the surroundings. We'll be temporarily protected. Expressionlessly, Chu-he shook out the contents of her backpack and handed the energy bars and night vision goggles to Gu Jinglian. She then threw the AK and RPG-7B quiver on her back in front of him and began to swiftly load the Gatling gun with ammunition. Gu Jinglian broke off a piece of energy bar and stuffed it into his mouth. He mixed it with his saliva and quickly strapped his AK and rocket launcher to his shoulder. The atmosphere instantly became heavy. He looked at Chu-ho in front of him, and his hands froze. His eyebrows gradually became heavy. The odds are against us, Gu Jinglian said. You also know that this place is surrounded by the rebel army. At this critical moment, I'll cover you. You leave first. Chu-ho raised her face, twitched the corner of her lips, threw the water bottle to Silver Fox, and quickly got up. Listen, Gu Jinglian, we're together. If we want to leave, we'll leave together. Gu Jinglian didn't say anything. He knew, and Chu-ho probably also understood, that the current situation wasn't optimistic. Gu Jinglian wanted to protect her, even at the cost of his life. Chapter 35-49. Seeing that he was silent, Chu-ho's face darkened. She grabbed his chin and squeezed it tightly. Listen up. Either we leave North Africa together or we die together. There are no other options. Gu Jinglian looked up. His eyes flickered and his lips suddenly curved. You won't regret it? This woman was actually willing to risk her life with him. In such a dangerous environment, she said that she would either leave with him or die together. Was she really not afraid? Of course. From the moment I decided to step on the cargo ship to North Africa, I won't regret it. Gu Jinglian also stood up and stared at her for a long time. Seeing that he kept staring at her, Chu-ho couldn't help but take half a step back. She said guiltily, "What are you doing?" "So you admit it." Gu Jinglian said this without rhyme or reason. Chu-ho frowned. She didn't understand what he was trying to say. "What do you mean? You admit that you came to North Africa because you were worried about me." When Chu-ho heard this, her face immediately flushed red. She clenched her fists. Before she could refute, Gu Jinglian suddenly took a step forward and hugged her tightly with his right hand. He clasped the back of her neck and kissed her deeply. Lin Shi inadvertently saw this intimate scene. Her face immediately turned red, and she immediately covered her face with both hands. It was not suitable for children. See no evil, hear no evil. Chu-ho wanted to push him away, but Gu Jinglian held her tightly. The more she struggled, the deeper she sank into his arms. Gu Jinglian kissed her until she was about to suffocate. He then released her, but he still wanted more and pecked her blushing face. Chu-ho's face became even hotter. She wanted to rebuke him, but she couldn't say a word for a long time. Okay, don't waste time. Gu Jinglian turned the bag over and all the equipment fell to the ground at once. When Chu-ho heard this, anger rose in her heart. What did he mean by don't waste time? He was clearly the one who kissed her, and he still had the cheek to tell her not to waste time. She was about to explode when Gu Jinglian handed her a gun. A charming smile appeared on his handsome face that was stained with dust. "Let's kill our way out." Chu Ho immediately laughed. She took the gun from him and tied it to her waist. At this moment, the winds of war in the west and artillery fire spread. Thick smoke billowed from the coconut grove, and flames flickered. The HU-5 grenade exploded with a huge shockwave. The earth shook, and the aura of death once again gathered around the land. The tank rumbled past the ruins, the wreckage, and the shadows of the trees. The helicopter hovered in the air, and several white signal lights swept through the forest. He carefully hunched her back and snuck into the forest alone. The thorns mercilessly slashed across her cheeks, causing blood to gush out of the wounds. She hugged a Barrett M99 sniper rifle. Her footsteps were steady, her expression was cold, and her face was covered in dust. She leaned against a hidden tree and squatted down. She took out a straw from her collar and drank the last mouthful of water stored in her jacket. Her lips were still pale and dry. Although she was wearing a bulletproof vest over her camouflage uniform, her beautiful figure was still exposed. Chapter 3550. Gu Jinglian and Lin Shi followed closely behind her. They leaned against the barrier and raised their hands to wipe away the blood and dirt on their faces. Chu Ho looked at him. Gu Jinglian's hair was messed up in the wind, and his handsome face was ravaged by the wind. Beneath his handsome eyebrows was a pair of seductive peach blossom eyes. Time ticked by. Chu Ho rested for a while before turning around and crouching behind a tree. She raised the heavy sniper rifle in her hand and aimed accurately at the lens. She slowly narrowed one eye and focused all her attention on the sniper scope. She held her breath and waited calmly. She counted silently in her heart. Suddenly, Chu Ho pulled the trigger. The rapid ammunition detonated the improvised explosive device that had been deployed earlier. With a loud bang, a tank was blocked 100 meters away from the wall of fire. Chu Ho slung the sniper rifle over her shoulder and injected the last dose of adrenaline. She pulled out a military-grade dagger and ran toward the tank. Gu Jinglian quickly followed. An M1A1 tank was parked quietly in place. At that moment, a nimble figure silently snuck behind the tank and opened the door to the combat room. The soldier in the combat room didn't even have time to see who it was before he was punched in the head. Before he could react, a strong arm picked up his tottering body and twirled the dagger in the soldier's hand. The poor man felt a chill in his throat and hot blood sprayed onto the passenger seat. The stench of blood assailed his nostrils. Chu Ho quickly used the same method to sneak into the engine room, leaving behind a collapsed corpse and a messy cabin. She crept toward the cockpit. Zaifi, there's an affair. Zaifi, please answer if you hear me. Please answer if you hear me. Zaifi, quickly lock onto the target. A man's standard English voice rang out from the cockpit of the tank. However, there was an eerie silence in the cabin. No one answered. A sturdy combat boot stepped on a corpse that was gradually turning cold. Chu Ho lifted his cold face. Blood was flowing from the dagger in front of him. She wiped away the blood that had splattered on her face, and her eyes revealed a ferocious look. She kicked away the corpse that was in the way and cut off the radio communication. The noise stopped abruptly, and the cabin returned to silence. She was very familiar with the operation of the tank. In just a few seconds, Chu Ho quickly adapted to the operation of the M1A1. Gu Jinglian also got into the tank. One person was in charge of setting up the tank, while the other was in charge of the turret. She skillfully pushed the joystick and cut into the order, her cold eyes surging like a storm. Zaifi, please answer if you hear me. Please answer if you hear me. In the cockpit of another tank, a man with chestnut hair shouted at the top of his lungs. He cursed as he gasped for breath, the veins on his forehead bulging. The burly man was sweating profusely as an inexplicable uneasiness rose in his heart. In that breathtaking moment, a beam of fire whistled through the air. The man with chestnut hair only felt the cabin shake violently. He was so shocked that he fell back into his seat. This shot had fatally struck the main turret of the tank, and the core of the attack had been accurately destroyed. Chapter 35:51. Chu-Ho held the joystick with both hands, and her gaze was domineering. Gu Jinglian controlled the turret and kept attacking the target. Under the attack of the artillery, the target tank crashed into a tree trunk and flipped over. "You drove the tank well," Gu Jinglian rarely praised. Chu-Ho also said, "Your aim is not bad." The two of them looked at each other and smiled. At such a dangerous moment, the two of them could still talk and laugh so easily. Chu-Ho said, "I've driven tanks, nuclear submarines, and armored vehicles before." Gu Jinglian said, "This is the first time in my life that I've driven a tank, but I saw that you were so familiar with it that I thought you had experience. I'm just learning now." The two of them reached a safe area and found Lin Shi. Chu-Ho drove the tank until they were outside the battlefield. There was an armored vehicle parked by the side of the road. When the lights came on, there was someone inside. Chu-Ho used the same trick again and sneaked into the armored vehicle. After killing the soldiers who had let down their guard, Gu Jinglian got into the car with Lin Shi. She drove the armored vehicle, and the three of them sped towards the signal base station. The night was dark, and dark clouds covered the moon. The hazy light and shadow shone into the abandoned signal tower, making it look like a lonely city. The three of them rushed to the signal base station, but Gu Jinglian did not see anyone else. He walked into the signal base station, but there was no one inside. Gu Jinglian's eyes darkened, but he had already guessed that the team that was separated from him was probably dead. After all, having too many people would be a burden. That team was not made up of elite soldiers. There were many engineers and higher-ups in it. They did not have the strength to truss a chicken and could not even shoot accurately. It was indeed difficult to break out of the encirclement with so many people. If it were not for Chu-Ho, he would not have been able to kill his way out on his own. After all, war was merciless. No one had an absolute halo, and deaths and injuries were inevitable. Chu-Ho also expected that those people had probably died in the battlefield, but she heard Gu Jinglian say, "We don't have engineers. The signal may not be able to be repaired." "It's all right." Chu-Ho smiled and walked to the dashboard. He opened the hidden door and looked at the circuit inside. "Find the toolbox. I'll give it a try." "You can?" "Yes." Chu-Ho's reply was concise and comprehensive. Gu Jinglian and Lin Shi immediately split up to look for the toolbox. They finally found it in the cupboard. In the sky far away, the smoke of gunpowder gradually spread out, and the clamor of firearms gradually came to an end. 8,000 meters away from the coconut grove, a well-equipped, fully armed team was rapidly closing in on the signal tower. "Max, lead the 7th Division and surround the signal tower in the north. Storm, you and the 9th Division will break through the encirclement with me." A man in a camouflage uniform was crawling in front of the broken wall. He was the leader of the entire team. The man turned around and ordered his men with a serious expression. He said solemnly, "We just received news that a suspected government spy has sneaked into the war zone and is heading towards the signal tower. We have to surround them and eliminate the spy." A group of Special Forces soldiers holding Browning M2 machine guns nodded quietly. Soon, the lighthouse let out an alarm that resounded through the sky. Beams of signal beams crisscrossed and rotated in the sky. The man calmly waved his hand and said in a low voice, "Charge!" Chapter 35:52. The leader held his head high and led the elite division to the north of the lighthouse. At this moment, a sniper rifle shot rang out, and Max fell to the ground with a thud. His head had been accurately blown off. The bullet was too powerful and seemed to have been carefully modified. Poor D, whose head was a bloody mess. It was too horrible to look at. The leader was stunned. However, in the next moment, a fireball whizzed towards the 7th Division like a meteor with a thick tail of smoke behind it. The leader of the division roared in grief and indignation. Following a loud explosion, miserable howls of pain could be heard. The Apira's rocket launcher had overturned the entire 7th Division, and an earth-shattering shockwave swept over them. Then, a cold voice echoed through the loudspeaker in the silent night. "I'm warning you. No matter whose unit you're from, retreat 5 miles away immediately. Otherwise, I won't show any mercy. The cold and arrogant voice reverberated in the ruins. The man looked around cautiously, but he could not see anyone. The voice said again, "Hey, I'm up there." The man looked up and saw Chu-Ho with her black hair dancing in the wind. She stood proudly at the top of the lighthouse with her arms crossed. Behind her, signal beams crisscrossed and overlapped. The strong wind lifted the coat tied around her waist. She looked valiant. Chu-Ho's expression was arrogant. Her slim figure was like a phantom from the Azura Palace, cold and heartless. She gently stroked the modified Barrett M99 sniper rifle in her arms. From time to time, she tilted her head and opened the scope to aim at the leader's head. She smiled eerily and said, "If you want to go to hell, I don't mind you taking one step closer." The man's expression changed. Panic flashed through his eyes. The group of special forces also panicked. They stood still and did not dare to act rashly. The leader raised the loudspeaker and said sternly, "Are you spies sent by the government? If you hand over the information in your hands now, we'll let you live immediately." Chu-Ho raised her eyebrows and said sarcastically, "Oh, looks like there's a misunderstanding. I'm not a spy. Those casualties in the battle zone, were they your doing?" "Yes," Chu-Ho admitted. "It was you rebels who wanted to kill me for no reason. I was just trying to protect myself." The leader's face turned cold and a chill ran down his spine. An army of more than 100 people had been completely annihilated by this seemingly weak woman. Who was she? "So many of our brothers have been killed by you. This blood debt must be paid." Chu-Ho sneered and said slowly, "Our people have also died in the hands of your soldiers. So many innocent civilians have suffered heavy casualties. If that's the case, then we're on good terms." Hearing this, the leader was so shocked that he took a deep breath, and his eyes widened in anger. Chu-Ho pointed at his head and snorted disdainfully. He casually sat down on the edge of the pagoda, his posture free and unrestrained. "I'm going to count down from 10 seconds. If you don't retreat, I can't guarantee what I'll do." 10. Chu-Ho was very beautiful. She was so beautiful that she was enchanting and breathtaking. The wind at the top of the pagoda was very strong. It messed up her hair, making it look especially messy. Chu-Ho held the loudspeaker and raised her eyebrows with a cold smile as she counted down, 9, 8. The man was so angry that he gritted his teeth and held his breath for a long time. Chapter 35:53. So many people have died in her hands. It seems that this woman is not simple. If we act rashly, so many people might die in her hands. 6, 5. As Chu-Ho counted, she held the sniper rifle in her hands even tighter. Her forehead was covered in cold sweat. "Give the order, Captain." The leader clenched his fists tightly. There was unwillingness and shame in his eyes. After hesitating for a few seconds, he gritted his teeth and said, "Retreat!" In the team, a hoarse voice rang out, "Retreat! Retreat!" The team immediately retreated until they were more than 1,000 meters away. Chu-Ho confirmed that the team had left through the sniper scope. She collapsed on the ground and leaned against the wall, trembling all over. This empty fort strategy had finally fooled these people. In fact, in the current situation, Chu-Ho and Gu Jinglian had no more ammunition on them. The RPG rocket launcher just now was their last weapon. It could be said that they had run out of ammunition all the way to the signal tower. As they left the battlefield, Chu-Ho could clearly feel that there were troops following behind them, chasing them all the way. However, they did not have any ammunition. In front of such a fully armed troop, they had lost all their strength. In ancient times, when the enemy was outnumbered, they lacked preparation. They deliberately showed that they did not have any troops, causing the illusion that there was an ambush and causing them to retreat in fear. In the era of the Three Kingdoms, Sima Yi's army approached the west side of the city. Zhuge Liang did not have any troops to resist, but he opened the city gate and played the zither on the city tower. Sima Yi suspected that there was an ambush, so he immediately retreated. This was the origin of the empty fort strategy. However, Chu Ho did not expect that at the last moment. She would use the empty fort strategy to scare off these soldiers. Just now, when they were counting down, she was more nervous than anyone else. She was worried that these people would not be deceived and would directly attack. They would be captured before they could even wait for help. Being captured was an ideal situation. If they were treated as spies and had their throats slit, then the three of them would really not be able to return. Gu Jinglian climbed to the top of the tower and saw Chu Ho leaning against the wall with a frightened look. He walked over, hugged her, and gently stroked her hair. He laughed and said, "So there are times when you are afraid of death." "I'm not afraid of death." Chu Ho clenched his fists. "I'm afraid that Xiao Bao will lose us." Gu Jinglian was stunned. He held her shoulders stiffly and comforted her gently. "It's okay. It's all in the past." Chu Ho, let's go home." "Yeah, let's go home. Xiao Bao is still waiting for us?" Gu Jinglian curled his lips and smiled at her, only to find that Chu Ho's eyes were filled with tears. She was deeply touched. He kissed her once again. It was a kiss from the brink of death. It was short but warm. An FC-1 Valiant Dragon aircraft pierced through the clouds and arrived. Gu Jinglian carried Lin Shi and boarded the plane. Chu Ho clung onto the handrail of the cabin. The strands of hair in front of his forehead danced in the wind, occasionally pricking his eyelids, but it did not hurt or itch. She pursed her thin lips tightly and suddenly frowned as she looked back. The sky in the distance was gradually turning white. The beautiful sunrise that she had been looking forward to finally appeared in front of her eyes. 8,000 meters away, smoke rose in spirals above the coconut grove. That was the place where she and Gu Jinglian had fought their last battle. It was hard to imagine that the two of them, alone with a child, had actually fought their way out. Chapter 3554. Chu He let out a sudden laugh and nimbly boarded the plane. Her back view was stiff and firm. 2 days later, the evacuation fleet docked at the harbor. Gu Jinglian and Chu Ho brought Lin Shi to line up and get ready to board the ship. When the fleet reached them, they were stopped. Who is this child? Because he did not have a passport, and because there were restrictions on the number of people who could evacuate, the fleet had to stop under fire. There was a limit to the capacity, and non-nationals were not allowed to board the ship. Lin Shi suddenly became nervous and pinched the corner of his shirt. How could he forget? He was born in North Africa. To be precise, he did not have a passport. But his father and mother did. Initially, his father and mother wanted to take him away from here. However, things happened later. His father and mother were no longer around, and he lost the right to board the ship. Lin Shi's face suddenly looked lonely. Chu Ho hugged him tightly and said to the person in charge of the embassy, "This is my son." "Your son?" "Yes. His father and I came to North Africa to do business. Our son was born in North Africa. During this war, we plan to bring our son back to develop his career. Why is there a problem?" Gu Jinglian said, "This is our son, Gu Lin Shi. He doesn't have a passport, but this is a special case. Please make an exception." Lin Shi was stunned. He looked up at Chu Ho and Gu Jinglian in disbelief. The warmth in his heart instantly overwhelmed him. "All right, let's board the ship." Gu Jinglian held the back of his head and said, "Lin Shi, aren't you going to thank Uncle?" "Thank you, Uncle." Lin Shi thanked him obediently, and the three of them finally boarded the ship. Generally speaking, because there were a lot of people in the evacuation fleet, many beds had to be empty. Usually, a bed that could fit one person was not allowed to sleep on it. Only 3 people were allowed to sit on it. This way, 3 people could be squeezed in. However, Chu Ho was too tired. The 3 of them were very tired, especially Lin Shi. After all, he was a child and his physical strength was limited. Somehow, Gu Jinglian managed to get the crew to arrange a single room for them. There were 2 beds in the room, and the 3 of them had to make do for a few nights. Returning to the capital from North Africa, they needed to dock at Victoria Harbor. On the ship, Gu Jinglian called Uncle Fu and informed him that the 3 of them had safely boarded the fleet to return to China. Uncle Fu cried tears of joy. "Master, where is Chu Ho?" "Chu Ho is fine. He's only slightly injured." "Is it serious?" It's a little serious, but for now we can only hold on until we return home. Uncle Fu was worried, but he was also happy. For the past few nights, he had been unable to sleep. He tossed and turned in bed because he was worried that Gu Jinglian and Chu Ho had met with an accident in North Africa. If something happened to Chu Ho while he was searching for Gu Jinglian, he would definitely blame himself to death. He didn't know how to explain this to Xiao Bao. He had been hiding this matter from Xiao Bao from the beginning to the end. However, now that Gu Jinglian and Chu Ho had returned safely, he had finally gotten rid of one of his worries. Master, please take good care of Chu Ho. After all, she suffered a lot in order to find you. I don't need you to teach me. I will take good care of my woman. You don't need to worry about it. When Uncle Fu heard this, he still used Gu Jinglian's usual arrogant tone. However, he did not feel wronged at all. Instead, he felt gratified. Master finally knew how to take care of people. Chapter 35:55. By the time Gu Jinglian returned to the cabin, Chu Ho was already asleep. However, she had to sleep on her stomach to avoid touching the wound because of the injury on her back. Lin Shi gently covered himself with the blanket. Gu Jinglian sat on the bed. Seeing that Lin Shi was so sensible, he suddenly asked, "What do you plan to do after you return to China?" The teenager was stunned when he heard this. He did not speak. He did not have his parents, and he did not have a home. Even if he returned to China, he did not know where to go. Gu Jinglian saw his hesitant expression and asked, "How about being my son?" Lin Shi's eyes widened when he heard this. He was so embarrassed that he did not know what to do. You don't have to call me Dad. It's just that you don't have a home, so I can't just watch you be sent to the welfare home." Gu Jinglian continued, "After we return to China, I will go through the adoption procedures. I will adopt you, raise you, and provide for your education. How about that?" He sounded as if he was negotiating with him. It was obvious that he respected his opinion. However, Lin Shi was even more hesitant. "Is that okay? Won't it be too much trouble for you? I don't want to burden you." Lin Shi was very sensible. Naturally, he was worried that it would cause trouble for Gu Jinglian and Chu Ho. He had heard them casually mention that they already had a son. If they raised him, would it cause trouble? However, Gu Jinglian laughed. He had never mentioned his background to this child, and Lin Shi did not know much about the Gu family. Even if he raised 100 children, he would not feel any burden at all, let alone one. Gu Jinglian said, "Don't worry, as long as you are willing." Lin Shi nodded slowly and said, "Yes, I am willing. However, I will work hard in my studies. The money for my studies and living expenses will be a loan from you. When I grow up and have a job, I will return it to you." His childish words made Gu Jinglian laugh. He waved his hand and said, "Come here." Lin Shi walked over. Gu Jinglian held him in his arms and helped him lie down on the bed. He said, "Go to sleep." As he spoke, he covered him with the blanket. Lin Shi asked in surprise, "Uncle, aren't you going to sleep?" "I'm not tired." Lin Shi pursed his lips and did not force him to sleep. He was indeed so tired that he fell asleep as soon as he closed his eyes. Gu Jinglian's expression darkened as he looked at his sleeping face. However, he was conflicted about Gong Fan's matter. That child looked identical to the Mu family's Yun Tianyu. That was a long time ago. He heard that Mu Yaja had lost his beloved son in an accident. Although this matter was not made public, she was, after all, in the same circle as him. As far as he knew, the woman had yet to walk out of the trauma of losing Yuyu to this day. Gu Jinglian became even more suspicious of the. Gu Jinglian leaned gently against the wall and closed his eyes to rest. After 3 days and 3 nights of drifting on the sea, they finally reached Victoria Harbor 4 days later. Uncle Fu and Xiao Bao were already waiting for them at the harbor early in the morning. Chapter 35:56. Chu Ho only felt a black shadow pouncing on her. It was only when Xiao Bao pounced into her arms that she realized that this black shadow was the little guy she had been thinking about day and night. "Mom, you're finally back. I missed you so much." Xiao Bao didn't know that Chu Ho was injured. When he pounced on her, it affected her wound. Chu Ho frowned in pain and endured it. Gu Jinglian suddenly grabbed Xiao Bao's ear and said fiercely, "Your mom is injured. Take it easy." He was still as simple and violent as before, not showing any mercy to his own son. Xiao Bao grimaced in pain and howled. However, when he heard Gu Jinglian say that Chu Ho was injured, he suddenly became nervous. "Mom is injured?" Xiao Bao said and wanted to check. However, Chu Ho stopped him. She pressed his head and said, "It's okay. Just don't cause any more trouble. Just don't cause any more trouble. Just don't cause any more trouble." These words of indifference kept magnifying in his mind. Xiao Bao poked his fingers aggrievedly. He turned his head and suddenly saw Lin Shi in Gu Jinglian's arms. This unfamiliar boy who was a few years older than him was stunned. He was a little jealous. Dad had never hugged him like this before. As a result, Xiao Bao looked at Lin Shi with unconcealable hostility. Gu Jinglian put Lin Shi down. Lin Shi shrank behind Chu Ho uneasily. Chu Ho saw the hostility in Xiao Bao's eyes, so she said to Xiao Bao, "Xiao Bao, I want to discuss something with you." She squatted down with difficulty and pulled Lin Shi in front of Xiao Bao. She said, "His name is Lin Shi. From now on, he'll be your brother. Okay?" "What do you mean?" "Mom went to North Africa to look for your dad and encountered danger on the way. It was this little brother who saved Mom. However, it's a pity." Chu Ho frowned and said, "Little brother's parents met with an accident in North Africa. After he returned to China, he was homeless, so Dad and Mom decided to adopt him." At first, Xiao Bao was still a little conflicted when he heard that he was going to adopt an unfamiliar child. However, after hearing that this young man had saved his mother and father, Xiao Bao's face suddenly became hesitant. No matter what, he was very grateful for saving his mother. But Xiao Bao asked carefully, "If Mom adopts him, will she not love Xiao Bao anymore? How could this be?" Chu Ho rubbed his chubby little face and said reproachfully, "Xiao Bao, you're so stupid. Why would you think that? Think about it, Mom and Dad won't stop loving you. Instead, you'll have a little brother who loves you." Lin Shi also gathered his courage and said, I will definitely be a good brother." He was too nervous and wanted to perform well. Therefore, he was stuttering when he spoke. As Lin Shi spoke, he nervously extended his hand. His palm was wet with cold sweat. He had heard from Chu Ho that she had a 6-year-old child, so he desperately wanted to get Xiao Bao's acknowledgement. Xiao Bao looked at Lin Shi's outstretched hand, then looked at Gu Jinglian and Chu Ho. Finally, his gaze fell on Lin Shi's sincere face. Seeing that he was so nervous that his lips were trembling, he felt his heart ache for him. He did not hold Lin Shi's hand. Instead, he walked forward and hugged him gently, giving him a friendly hug. Chapter 35:57. He thanked him sincerely. At the same time, Xiao Bao smiled and said, "However, from now on, you're my older brother. As your younger brother, I'll take good care of you too." Lin Shi was a little surprised. He did not expect Xiao Bao to accept him as an outsider so easily, let alone say such heartwarming words like, "I'll take good care of you too." However, to Xiao Bao, although Lin Shi was a stranger, he did not have the ability to do so. This little brother had saved his father and mother for him. This kind of life-saving grace was too precious. "You don't have a home anymore, so the Gu family is your home," Xiao Bao said. For some reason, Lin Shi, who was so stubborn that he refused to shed a single tear even in the face of such a ferocious rebel army, actually shed tears because of this sentence. After returning to the Gu family, Gu Jinglian immediately called for the doctor to check on Chu Ho's injuries. The wound was infected and inflamed. In such a harsh and complicated environment, even if the wound was properly bandaged, applied medicine and disinfected, due to the fighting along the way, the originally bandaged wound showed signs of healing. However, due to the violent movements, it was torn open, healed, and torn open again. This repeated over and over again, and in addition to the environment, it was inflamed. Fortunately, it was not too serious. It was just a little festering and pus. It was a pity that this place would be scarred. However, Chu Ho had so many injuries on his body that one more would not make a difference. There were several gunshot wounds on her body, and this was probably the lightest one. Gu Jinglian had specially instructed Chu Ho to do a full body checkup. Chu Ho did a full body checkup. He remembered that, during one of the explosions, the strong shockwave had directly flipped them over. Gu Jinglian was not too far away from the impact, but Chu Ho was sent flying back to the tree trunk. He did not know if his tendons and bones were injured. The doctor touched his tendons and bones. After asking, Chu Ho also said that he did not feel any injuries. Hence, at least his tendons and bones were not injured. Gu Jinglian was relieved. Xiao Bao did not know what was going on. Only after Uncle Fu explained again and again did he understand. It turned out that his father was stuck in North Africa because of work. His mother was worried and rushed to North Africa. The two met on the way and returned together. Fortunately, both of them were fine. However, Gu Jinglian knew very well that if it weren't for Chu Ho's tacit cooperation, he probably wouldn't have been able to get out of North Africa in a short time. And this was the most optimistic scenario. With Chu Ho's injuries, he probably wouldn't be able to get out of bed for at least half a month. She applied the medicine and lay down. The doctor examined Lin Shi and Gu Jinglian again. Gu Jinglian only suffered some superficial injuries. In the end, it was nothing more than a dislocated ankle, but he reconnected it himself. The doctor repositioned it for him. Other than that, he was fine. Lin Shi suffered more injuries, but most of them were superficial wounds and not too serious. The trip to North Africa was a thrilling one. Fortunately, they were safe. However, during the half a month that Chu Ho was bedridden, Uncle Fu discovered something very strange. His master actually knew how to take care of someone. During the half a month that Chu Ho was bedridden, it was difficult for her to move around. She could not sit up very well. Occasionally, she would turn around and need someone to carry her. Chapter 35:58. Now that he was bent on recuperating, he could not be too reckless. He had to be careful in everything he did to avoid affecting his wound. Uncle Fu originally wanted to hire a nurse, but Gu Jinglian rejected it. When he asked for the reason, he refused to say anything. It was only when he passed by the room in the middle of the night that Uncle Fu saw Gu Jinglian turning over with Chu Ho in his arms through the crack in the door that he suddenly understood. It turned out that the old master was worried that the nurse would be clumsy and wanted to take care of him personally. Gu Jinglian usually did not do any chores. Other than work and the Gu group's matters, he was like a shopkeeper who did not care about anything else. Not to mention taking care of an injured person, he would not even know how to wash the dishes. He did not do any chores and had never served anyone like this before. However, in the past half a month when Chu Ho was bedridden, Gu Jinglian had been taking care of him. Chu Ho was also very surprised. She did not expect that Gu Jinglian seemed to have changed a lot after returning from North Africa. Even when facing her, Gu Jinglian still had his usual arrogant and cold face. However, he would accede to her every request. He even tried to wash her face and peel an apple himself. The scary thing was that when it came to taking care of people, he could not do anything else except peel an apple. He actually used a military knife to peel it, and the skin did not even break. How valiant! It was also an eye-opener for her. Gu Jinglian asked Uncle Fu to investigate a matter. Uncle Fu thought that it was something important, but he did not expect Gu Jinglian to ask him to investigate Mu Yage's son, Yun Tianyu. Master, why are you suddenly asking about this child? Why? This child? Uncle Fu sighed as he spoke. This child is Yun Shishi's sore spot. Dead? Yes. Do you have a photo of Yun Tianyu? Uncle Fu shook his head when he heard this. But I have a photo of Mu Yichen. Mu Yage's eldest son? Yes. He and Yun Tianyu are twins, and they look exactly the same. Master, I'm a little curious. Why are you suddenly asking about this child? Because, Gu Jinglian said faintly, I met him in North Africa. Who? Uncle Fu hesitated for a moment before his expression changed. Could it be Yun Tianyu? Gong Fan. Gong Fan? You should know about the Hurricane Group. Gu Jinglian paused for a moment before continuing. It was Hurricane Group that took over Weyert. I saw a child who looked exactly like Yun Tianyu in North Africa, but his name isn't Tianyu. His name is Gong Fan. This Uncle Fu was also speechless. He felt very strange. Yun Tianyu was indeed no longer around. Even after so long, Mu Yaja and Yun Shishir still could not walk out of the shadow. Yun Shishir, in particular, was still very upset. Yun Tianyu's name could not be mentioned at all. It was Yun Shishir's biggest pain in her heart. Uncle Fu asked hesitantly, "Master, are you sure? A dead person can't be brought back to life. Are you sure you're not mistaken?" Gu Jinglian was also a little hesitant. He was also a little skeptical. Do you think there are two people who look exactly the same in this world? Chapter 35:59. Gu Jinglian furrowed his brows. But what? Uncle Fu said, "It's just that it's impossible to say that they look like they're made from the same mold. Even if they're twins, they look different." Gu Jinglian furrowed his brows slightly but did not say anything. "Forget it. There's no need to get involved in the Mu family's matters. This is their family matter." Uncle Fu sized him up and suddenly said carefully, "Old master, ever since you came back from North Africa, I've noticed that you've changed a lot." "How have I changed?" "You've become gentler." Uncle Fu smiled and observed his expression as he said, "When I passed by Chu Ho's room earlier, I saw you taking care of her so attentively. This is the first time I've noticed that you know how to take care of." Before he could finish his sentence, Uncle Fu saw the obvious displeasure on Gu Jinglian's face and immediately corrected himself awkwardly. Take care of. Gu Jinglian's expression softened a little. Uncle Fu then continued, "Old master would never lower himself to take care of someone in the past. This time, I feel that old master and Chu Ho's relationship has improved a lot. Why else would they say that a friend in need is a friend indeed? After all, he had gone through a life-and-death situation. Compared to the tit-for-tat between the two of them, it was indeed different." Gu Jinglian gave him a cold sidelong glance. "You talk too much." Fu Bo tactfully shut his mouth and didn't say anything. He knew that old master was shy. Gu Jinglian stood up and said expressionlessly, "She's injured, so it's inconvenient for her. I'll just—" His expression was a little unnatural. It was obvious that he felt a little uncomfortable. "It's only right for me to take care of her." Uncle Fu cursed silently in his heart. What a prideful guy. Chu Ho woke up and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling in a daze. When he had just returned to the Gu family, he had a high fever due to his wound being infected. It was only until last night that he recovered some of his vitality. Gu Jinglian suddenly pushed the door open and walked in. Chu Ho heard the footsteps and looked up. When he saw that it was Gu Jinglian, he lay back on the bed like a corpse. "Hungry?" Gu Jinglian asked. Chu Ho shook his head. "I don't have any appetite." He had been on anti-inflammatory drugs for the past few days and was about to vomit. He had no appetite at all. "I want to eat something sour." "Sour?" Gu Jinglian's first reaction was, "You're pregnant." Chu Ho. Seeing that she did not speak, Gu Jinglian's expression suddenly became unnatural. "Really?" He remembered that he had met her once before. What does eating sour food have to do with pregnancy? It's not like only pregnant women want to eat sour food. Chu Ho paused and said, "Don't worry, I took birth control pills last time." Gu Jinglian did not react at first, until he suddenly realized what birth control pills were. He came back to his senses, but his eyes instantly darkened. Birth control pills? From his tone, he sounded a little unhappy. He did not notice it and hummed in acknowledgement. "Why did you take this pill?" "Of course I have to take it. It's a critical period." Chu Ho said again, "It's so troublesome to be pregnant." Gu Jinglian's expression gradually darkened when he heard this. She said that being pregnant was troublesome. She actually felt that being pregnant with his child was a troublesome matter. Gu Jinglian's eyes suddenly turned cold. Chapter 35:60. "What's wrong with you? Why do you look like that?" Gu Jinglian's expression became even gloomier when she asked that question. This stupid woman actually dared to ask him why he looked like that. This kind of medicine can't be taken casually. His words made Chu Ho even angrier. How dare you say that? If it weren't for you. Chu Ho paused at this point. His face was strangely red and he couldn't continue. If he hadn't acted like a beast that night, she wouldn't have needed to take this kind of medicine. Everyone knew that taking morning after pills was bad for a woman's health. For a period of time, her menstrual cycle was messed up. However, fortunately, her physical fitness was good. She didn't need to take care of herself and slowly recovered. Gu Jinglian said coldly, "You don't have to take it. What if I'm pregnant?" Gu Jinglian said, "If I'm pregnant, I'll give birth to it." He replied almost at lightning speed. Chu Ho didn't react for a moment and was stunned. When he came back to his senses and repeated his words, Chu Ho was furious. A man is a man. It's easy to say that if I'm pregnant, I'll give birth to it. Gu Jinglian, don't you know how painful it is for a woman to give birth? Moreover, if the child is born, who will be responsible for raising it? The Gu family is so big. Can't we raise a child? In other words, even if she gave birth to a bunch of babies like a sow, Gu Jinglian could raise them with his eyes closed. Chu Ho's mind flashed with the image of her protecting a bunch of piglets like a sow. He shuddered. It was so scary. Chu Ho said coldly, "If I give birth, are you going to be responsible for breastfeeding, keeping watch at night and changing diapers?" Gu Jinglian stopped talking. Chu Ho snorted coldly. "So, you don't have to be responsible for what you say. When the child is born, you won't be the one to suffer." "I'll take responsibility," Gu Jinglian said out of the blue. Chu Ho was stunned. "What did you say?" Gu Jinglian repeated patiently, "I'll be responsible." Chu Ho felt so awkward that he couldn't say anything. However, from his tone, it was clear that he was serious. This man would never make promises easily, nor would he be like other men, who would use flowery words. However, he would definitely do what he said and never go back on his words. Gu Jinglian walked to the door and stopped Uncle Fu. He instructed him before returning to her bedside to sit down. 10 minutes later, Uncle Fu sent someone to buy a few jars of dark plums. Gu Jinglian took the jars, opened the lids, picked up a plum with a fork, and brought it to her lips. "Eat." It was a harsh sentence, as if he was forcing her to eat it. Chu Ho unhappily took a bite and put it into his mouth. Actually, she didn't particularly like sour food. However, she had been lying in bed with an 4 drip for the past few days. As a result, her mouth felt bitter and astringent. In addition, the nutritious meals that Uncle Fu had prepared for her were rather bland, so there was no taste in her mouth. Hence, she wanted to eat sour food just to stimulate her taste buds. The sweet and sour dark plum kept secreting saliva in her mouth. It was so sour that Chu Ho kept blinking her eyes. Gu Jinglian also picked up a dark plum and put it into his mouth. It was so sour that he frowned. However, after the intense sourness, it was sweet. It was very sweet. Chu Ho spat out the seed and opened her mouth again, indicating for him to feed her another dark plum. Chapter 3561. Xiao Bao was taking an afternoon nap in his room when he suddenly received a call from Lin Shi. He picked up the phone, only to hear Lin Shi mumbling pitifully, "Little treasure, where are you now?" "I'm in my room." "Well," Lin Shi said bitterly, "I think I'm lost." Xiao Bao blinked and said speechlessly, "Okay, where are you?" Lin Shi had been lost in the Gu residence for 5 days. The huge Gu residence was no different from a maze to him. How big was the Gu residence? Let's put it this way. His parents worked in a factory in North Africa, and the Gu residence was as big as the factory. However, he would never get lost in the factory, not only because he grew up there, but also because the roads in the factory were wide and there weren't many twists and turns. The Gu residence had dozens of courtyards in the front yard and backyard. These courtyards were connected by all sorts of winding corridors. It was no different from a maze. This wasn't the first time he got lost. Fortunately, Gu Jinglian had given him a cell phone. When he got lost, he could call Xiao Bao and Uncle Fu for help. "Lin," she said over the phone, I don't know where I am, but I see a rockery and a big pond. There are so many rockery and ponds. I don't know which place you're talking about. There's an ancestral hall here. There seems to be a lot of memorial tablets inside. Ancestral hall? Xiao Bao thought about it carefully and remembered that he had been there twice when the Gu family worshipped their ancestors, so he knew the way. Wait for me at the entrance of the ancestral hall. I'll go find you right away. After hanging up, Xiao Bao jumped out of bed, rubbed his eyes and ran downstairs. After passing through several courtyards, Xiao Bao finally found the ancestral hall. He saw Lin Shi standing at the entrance, looking a little embarrassed. Xiao Bao walked over and complained, Lin Shi, why are you here? You've been here for a few days, but you still don't know the way? Lin Shi said awkwardly, your house is so big, I get lost every time. The main thing is, I don't remember the way, so I can't tell the direction. Xiao Bao glared at him reproachfully. Lin Shi thought that he had said something wrong and looked at him uneasily. Xiao Bao said, what do you mean by my home? Lin Shi, this is your home too. When Lin Shi heard this, she realized that he was unhappy about this. Her heart warmed and she held his hand. All right, this is our home. I was wrong. Don't be angry. Xiao Bao smiled. Let's go. The two children walked hand in hand to the courtyard, but they heard a commotion not far away. It's the Gong family. Quickly go and inform the master. Then, Xiao Bao and Lin Shi saw Uncle Fu rushing to the main building. He was in such a hurry that he didn't even look at Xiao Bao. Xiao Bao looked at the entrance strangely. He saw that among the group of people, only a silver-haired man stood out. He had an imposing aura and was about the same height as Gu Jinglian. He wore a snow-white military-style trench coat and a pair of white combat boots. Every inch of his handsome face was exquisite and impeccable. Xiao Bao's eyes widened. This man was cool and handsome. Chapter 35:62. Hearing this, the man turned around and nodded slightly. He instructed a few of his men to stand guard outside the door and said coldly, wait for me at the door. With that said, he followed Uncle Fu to the guest room. When he passed by Xiao Bao and Lin Shi, the man looked straight ahead without looking back. His footsteps were like the wind, messing up Xiao Bao's bangs. Lin Shi was a little intimidated by his aura and asked fearfully, who is this man? Xiao Bao shook his head in confusion. I don't know either. In the guest room, Uncle Fu brewed a pot of Dahong Pao tea and poured 2 cups of tea for Gu Jinglian and Gong Jie. Young Master Jie, what brings you here? Gong Jie took a sip and put the tea aside. He didn't exchange too many pleasantries and went straight to the point. I heard that you just returned from North Africa a while ago. Although his voice was low, he couldn't hide his aura. Hearing this, Gu Jinglian said mildly, yes, I heard about it too. Gong Jie looked at him. The Gu Industries factory in North Africa, Werther, has been bought over by Hurricane along with the land. Since Hurricane bought it over, young Master Jie should know about it. Hearing this, Gong Jie's eyes darkened. Is this true? Gu Jinglian snorted coldly. Even in front of Gong Jie, it was hard to quell the anger in his heart. After all, he had been reluctant to give up that piece of land in Werther. At that time, he was on par with Hurricane. If Gong Fan hadn't been so despicable and ruthless, he wouldn't have taken the initiative to withdraw from the North African market. Gu Jinglian thought that Gong Jie knew about it and still came to the Gu household so brazenly to show off. Thus, his tone was very impolite. Young Master Jie, you don't have to pretend. After buying that piece of land, Hurricane Group is already the overlord of North Africa. Since that's the case, why did young Master Jie come to me and pretend to be polite? Don't tell me that you don't know about this. Gong Jie was wrongly accused. Gong Jie said honestly, I didn't know about this. To be precise, I didn't participate in the discussion. I even objected to the acquisition. He knew very well that monopolizing a market meant that he would obtain unprecedented benefits. However, this also meant that there would be no healthy competition. If it was not run properly, the market would be irredeemably rotten. There were wars in this world because of competition. Humans were also humans, and their survival was built on competition. Without competition, it would be regressing instead. It was no different from the closed-door countries of the Qing dynasty. When he was in charge of Hurricane, he had always considered a positive balance and did not oppress the other forces too much. Although his methods were also ruthless, compared to Gong Fan, they were not as terrifying and aggressive. However, if the pressure was too much, it would mean that there would be resistance. This was not something that he was happy to see. Therefore, he was not the one who initiated the acquisition. What made him even more dissatisfied was that no one in Hurricane knew about this. This matter was decided by Gong Fan directly. He did not discuss it with anyone, not even Gong Xiaoying. However, this was not the main point. The main point was, that child. Gong Jie asked in a low voice, "You went to North Africa and saw Gong Fan?" Gong Fan? Gu Jinglian did not evade the topic. "I saw him." "You saw him?" Gong Jie stood up excitedly. "You really saw that child?" Gu Jinglian raised his eyebrows. "Why? What's with that child that made young Master Jie so excited?" Chapter 3563. Have you seen his true appearance? Gong Jie asked again. When Gu Jinglian heard this, he picked up his teacup and casually picked up the lid. After taking a sip, he said calmly, "Yes, I did. What does he look like? I've only seen him once. I can't remember what he looks like." Gu Jinglian said truthfully, "Because that child has always been wearing a cloak and a big hat. He has never shown his true appearance to anyone." Gong Jie heard this. Indeed, he had seen Gong Fan once, but from a distance he saw his back view as he boarded the ship. It was so familiar, but he could not see his face. He only saw that he was wearing a wide fur coat, like a big cloak, and a hat, so he could not see his true appearance. In fact, not to mention outsiders, even the people in the group had not seen his true appearance. It was said that those who had seen his true appearance had been shot to death on the spot. This was Gong Xiaoying's order. Therefore, Gong Jie had always been very suspicious. What was the reason for protecting a child to the point that even if someone saw his face, they would immediately make this person disappear from this world? How unpresentable was he? He could not help but be a little suspicious. "You really don't remember?" Gu Jinglian said coldly. "I don't know how to draw portraits, and I can't describe him roughly, but if you take out a photo to compare, I might be able to recognize him." The reason why he was so calm and composed was because of the man's not-too-tough stance. The Hurricane group and the Gu family were not at odds with each other. It was just that such a thing had happened. The Hurricane group had violated Gu Jinglian's interests. It would be hypocritical to say that he did not bear a grudge. Gu Jinglian was very vengeful, and Gong Jie was an arrogant master. He had never taken the Gu family seriously. However, such an arrogant man did not have as high a stance in front of Gu Jinglian as before in order to inquire about the child's whereabouts. This meant that the child was very important, and Gu Jinglian was the only person who had seen the child and was still alive. To put it bluntly, he was the only lead. When Gong Jie heard this, he immediately took out a pocket watch from his chest and opened it. There was a picture embedded in the pocket watch. He walked over and handed the pocket watch to Gu Jinglian. He asked, "Take a look. Is this the child?" Gu Jinglian took the pocket watch. In the photo, there was an innocent child smiling at the camera. He squinted his eyes and smiled at the camera, looking pure and cute. Yun Tianyu. Indeed, he looked exactly like that child. Gong Fan was Yun Tianyu? The more he thought about it, the more terrifying it was. Gu Jinglian's lips curled into a smile. "Didn't I hear that the child disappeared in an accident? It's rumored that he's already dead." Gong Jie clenched his fists. "We can't come to this conclusion without seeing the corpse. Yes, if he's alive, we can't find him. If he's dead, we can't find his corpse. It's hard to say whether he's dead or not." Gu Jinglian closed the pocket watch and threw it back to Gong Jie. He asked coldly, "What if I say that the child might not be dead?" Gong Jie was stunned when he heard this. "You mean, young Master Jie is looking for me because everyone who has seen the child is dead, including my subordinates. They all died in the child's hands. Even if it was not Gong Fan's order, these people's lives were still his." He continued, "However, The Hurricane Group didn't have any disputes with the Gu family in the past, but it does now. The Hurricane Group has caused such a huge loss to the Gu family. How should we settle this debt? Chapter 3564. I don't care about the value of that piece of land. The problem is, why did that child buy that piece of land? Young Master Jie should know what he's doing. Gong Jie was silent for a long time before he returned to his seat and smiled. Young Master Gu is just worried that Hurricane will use that piece of land for experiments. When the time comes, they'll become the overlord in the future and threaten the Gu family's land. The world is bustling, and I come for benefits. The world is bustling, and I come for benefits. Young Master Jie should understand such a simple logic. Gu Jinglian had made it so clear. If Gong Jie still did not understand, then his title as Hurricane's chief commander was just an empty title. In other words, Gu Jinglian was implying that the Gu family's losses were small, but if Hurricane grew too big in the future, it would be lonely at the top. It would not be beneficial for Hurricane and the Gu family. Similarly, he also deliberately revealed that the child he saw in North Africa might be Yun Tianyu. However, Gong Jie still wanted a definite answer. He said, Hurricane will definitely compensate the Gu family for their losses. However, before that, you have to give me a definite answer. Is that child called Gong Fan really Yun Tianyu? I don't know. Gu Jinglian continued. No one dares to say such a thing. But the child I saw in North Africa has the same face as the child in the photo you showed me in your pocket watch. Upon hearing this, Gong Jie was so agitated that his whole body trembled. It's Yu, the legendary son of ghosts of Hurricane Group, that mysterious young man, is really Yu, who went missing in that accident. Gong Jie clenched his fists, not knowing if this was a good or bad news. If it's Yu, why doesn't he know how to go home? Does he not want home, daddy, mommy, and brothers and sisters? If it's not Yu, why do the two children have the same face? Gu Jinglian continued. Based on his appearance, the child is about 9 years old. 9 years old. Gong Jie grasped another piece of information. 9 years old. When Yu went missing, she was 8 years old. It had been more than a year since she went missing. Everything seemed to match. He didn't believe in such a great coincidence. Hence, he firmly believed that the mysterious youth called Gong Fan must be Yu. Gong Jie came to another conclusion. For the past year, Gong Xiaoying had been hiding Yu in Hurricane, and no one knew about it. Why is Yu in his hands? What did he do to Yu this time? Yu, who had been missing for a year, had turned into Gong Fan. Why had he become so ruthless? Gong Jie could not figure this out no matter how hard he tried. But one day he was almost 100% sure. Yu was Gong Fan. Gong Fan was Yu. When he found out, Gong Jie was extremely excited. For the past year, he had not stopped looking for Yu. However, he had not found him or his corpse. Yun Shishir missed her son too much and was depressed. If it weren't for Xiao Yichen and Yue Yao, she might not have been able to walk out of this trauma. Gong Jie stood up and said to Gu Jinglian, Young Master Gu, sorry to disturb you. He turned around and left in a hurry. Gu Jinglian watched Gong Jie's back coldly. He gently blew on the surface of his tea and took a sip. In the past, if the Gong family came looking for him and asked about this matter, Gu Jinglian would have treated it as if it had nothing to do with him and would have kept quiet. However, things were different now. Chapter 3565. Perhaps it was because she was worried and put herself in his shoes that her heart softened a little. Gu Jinglian put down his teacup, slowly stood up, and walked upstairs. When Gong Jie heard the news, he did not immediately look for Gong Xiaoying. Since his father had deliberately hidden Yu, named him Gong Fan, and isolated him from the world, it meant that his father had other intentions. If he found his father, Gong Xiaoying might not admit it. Instead, he would be even more guarded. As such, it might be even more difficult to find Yu. The most strange thing was that if Gong Fan was really Yu, why would he be loyal to Gong Xiaoying and not want to come home? Even if Yu did not have the ability to leave Gong Xiaoying, given Yu's personality, he would not be so loyal to Gong Xiaoying. Moreover, all along, Yu had done things that went against the original intention of the Heavenly Eye plan. Back then, Yu proposed the Heavenly Eye plan to control the war by controlling the information technology in the sky to suppress the war. Gong Xiaoying did not agree with this idea. But now, Gong Fan was going to start, sow discord and create a war. His Heavenly Eye plan was made purely for killing. This was not Yu. This was a demon. If he was really Yu, how did he become like this? Gong Jie was heartbroken, but he could not think of a reason. He did not tell Yun Shishir about this immediately. After all, before this matter was confirmed, he did not want her to be shocked and have too much hope. If something happened then, he was worried that she would not be able to accept it. Back then, when she walked out of the shadow of this matter, he saw how much pain his sister was in. Therefore, Gong Jie left the Gu family and went to the Shengyu Financial Group first. Mu Yaja was in the company. Gong Jie found his office, went in, and got straight to the point. Mu Yaja had just finished a meeting. Jiang Xin and Lu Jinyu were also in the office. Jiang Xin was a little surprised to see Gong Jie in such a hurry. "What's wrong? I have something to discuss with you." "What is it?" "You might still be alive." The man furrowed his brows when he heard that. "I know. However, we still haven't found his whereabouts." He had never given up on searching for Yu's whereabouts. Even though searching for a child was undoubtedly like searching for a needle in a haystack, and the cost of searching for a person every day was very high, no one was willing to give up. "That's exactly what I'm here to discuss with you," said the man. He sat down on the sofa, casually picked up the cup, and drank the tea in one gulp. At the side, Jiang Shen saw that Gong Jie was holding his teacup. He frowned and raised his hand, wanting to say something but hesitated. However, due to Gong Jie's abuse of power, he did not dare to say it out loud. He heard that this brother-in-law of his had a serious case of misophobia. He was afraid that he would be beaten to death by Gong Jie if he said anything. "I might have found out Yu's whereabouts." Mu Yaja heard this and reacted for a few seconds. He stood up abruptly. "What did you say?" "Gong Fan." Gong Jie said a name. "A few days ago there was a war in North Africa. The Gu family's Werther was acquired by hurricane. I remember mentioning this to you." "Okay." Mu Yaja asked again. "What's the connection between these two matters?" Chapter 3566. My father said that this child was left behind by him. But from what I know, it's not possible that this child is my father's direct descendant. "So, you suspect that it's Yu? "Yes, that's my initial suspicion." Gong Jie analyzed further. "Coincidentally, I heard that after Yu went missing, this child was with the Gong family. It's said that my father arranged for him to recuperate on a private island. This means that this child's health isn't good either. These characteristics are consistent with Yu's. I heard all of this from others." Mu Yaja asked again, "Do you have any concrete evidence?" Jiang Shun and Lu Jinyu listened quietly from the side, unable to express any opinions. Gong Jie continued, "Gu Jinglian just returned from North Africa. He's the only person who has seen that child and is still alive." "What do you mean?" "The Gong family has ordered that anyone who has seen the child's face is dead. This means that my father has protected him very well. Hence, no one knows what he looks like or who he is." As Gong Jie spoke, he frowned and said, "Some time ago, Hurricane acquired Wei-ert. I heard that it was a forced acquisition. Logically speaking, given Gu Jinglian's character, he would never give up that piece of land. I'm guessing that Gong Fan must have used something to threaten him and forced him to sign the agreement. As for why he didn't kill him, I don't know either." "Are you sure?" "It's precisely because I'm not sure that I didn't tell Shishir about this immediately. I'm worried that if that child isn't Yu, it'll be another disappointment." Mu Yaja nodded as well. "We have some leads on this matter. Let's keep it from him for the time being." "Wait!" Gong Jie suddenly stood up. Suddenly, he thought of something and his expression became serious. Mu Yaja saw that he looked nervous and didn't say anything. He was worried that he would disturb his thoughts. He must have found some useful clues again. Gong Jie turned around abruptly and glared at him. He suddenly said, "Lisa, Alice." "What?" "I remember that there was a long period of time when Alice wasn't at the headquarters. After you went missing, there was no news of her at the headquarters. I don't know where she went. If Yu was really brought back to the Gong family by father, then he must have been injured. Plus, his body needs to be nursed back to health, so he must need someone with great medical skills to look after him at all times." "Alice is a doctor?" "Yes, she's a medical prodigy from Hurricane." "Who is Lisa?" "She used to work for me, but I sent her to you to be Yu's personal bodyguard. I haven't seen her in a long time." Wuxia said, "If we find Alice and Lisa, we might be able to get some clues. I can't find any traces of Lisa, but Alice is in Hurricane now. If I go back and ask her, I might be able to get some information." Wuxia nodded. Gong Jie left the capital. He took a private jet and rushed back to Hurricane's headquarters overnight. Gong Xiaoying wasn't on the island. He found Alice. When he saw her, she was researching medicine in the laboratory. Alice was surprised to see him back. "Why are you back?" Gong Jie smiled and said, "I wanted to have a drink with you. Why are you busy?" Chapter 3567. In the pub. When Gong Jie took out the red wine that he had kept for many years, Alice could not help but feel flattered. "I see that you've been hiding these wines well. Why are you willing to take them out to drink now?" Gong Jie smiled and filled her glass. Alice smiled and took a sip from the wine glass. Her mouth was filled with its mellow fragrance. "You didn't come back in such a hurry just to have a drink with me, did you?" Alice teased. "Don't tell me you came back because you missed me?" Gong Jie was used to her teasing, but now he was not in the mood to chat with her. He said bluntly, "I came back to ask you something." "Okay, go ahead. I'll answer whatever you ask." As Alice spoke, she sipped the rim of her glass and sized him up. Gong Jie went straight to the point. "Some time ago, you disappeared for a long time. No one knows where you went." Alice's hand that was holding the wine glass suddenly paused as her gaze froze. Gong Jie looked into her eyes seriously and said word by word, "You would never leave the headquarters for no reason. There must be something special, and you had to hide this from everyone. Where did you go?" Alice did not speak. "You can't say?" Gong Jie narrowed his eyes and asked again. "Then let me ask you another question. Gong Fan, who is this child?" Alice's fingers that were holding the wine glass stiffened. Gong Jie observed the change in her expression and her stiff knuckles and understood what was going on. Alice asked, "Gong Fan, why are you suddenly asking about him? No one in Hurricane knows about this child's background." "You know, Alice, you know that the mouth can lie, but the eyes can't." Gong Jie said expressionlessly, "At this point, are you still trying to hide it from me? If I wasn't confident, I wouldn't have come looking for you. Since I found you, I'm 90% sure that Gong Fan is Yun Tianyu. Am I right?" Alice suddenly stopped talking. She said with a pale face, "I don't know anything." "Do you really not know anything? Or is it because father told you to keep it a secret?" Alice was speechless. Her feelings told her that she could not lie to Gong Jie. However, her rationality reminded her that she had to keep this a secret. However, he also felt heartache. For Yu and at the same time for Gong Jie. Alice put down her wine cup and suddenly said, "Gong Jie, as a friend, can I remind you to persuade your sister to return to the Gong family and acknowledge her father? Blood is thicker than water and is connected by blood. How can a biological daughter not acknowledge her father?" Gong Jie narrowed his eyes, his expression a little gloomy. "Alice, are you implying that father hid Yu as a punishment for sister?" Alice looked away in a panic. "I didn't say that." Gong Jie suddenly grabbed her chin and forced her to look at him. "Alice, look into my eyes." Alice looked up at him. Gong Jie said word by word, "Alice, if you lie to me in the slightest, you'll regret it." "Gong Jie, do you know that we've been looking for you like crazy?" Chapter 3568. Alice hurriedly said, "Gong Jie, calm down." "How can I calm down?" Gong Jie retorted angrily. If you tell me that because my sister didn't acknowledge him, because of this matter, you hid you by your side as a punishment, that's simply unreasonable. Things aren't what you think. Alice also stood up and said agitatedly, there's no punishment or targeting. It's just that. Gong Jie stared at her. Alice, you've never been a mother before. You don't know what the pain of losing a child means. Alice stared at Gong Jie with her mouth agape. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her heart. She clenched her fists and suddenly said self-deprecatingly, I'm afraid I won't have the chance to be a mother in this lifetime. However, that doesn't mean that I can't understand how it feels to be a mother. Gong Jie was also stunned. He knew that his unintentional words had hurt her. Alice was infertile. Before she came to Hurricane, she was an ordinary doctor. In order to research a vaccine, she did not hesitate to use herself as an experimental subject. She did not expect that the experiment would fail and the virus would backfire. She was infected with the virus and was finally out of danger after a few days and nights of emergency treatment. Because of this, she was expelled from the hospital. Because of the virus, she was infertile for the rest of her life. This almost became a thorn in her heart. I'm sorry. It's okay. It has nothing to do with you. She must have thought of the fact that she was infertile. Gong Jie did not mean that in his words. Gong Jie sighed. Forget it. Since you don't want to say it, then forget it. He was about to leave when Alice suddenly spoke. I'm curious. How did you suspect that Gong Fan is Yun Tianyu? Gong Jie paused in his steps and turned around with a smile. Direct and accurate. Combining the clues, Gong Fan's identity was indeed very suspicious. Alice said, Sit. Hearing this, Gong Jie did not say much and just sat down on a chair. Just as he sat down, Alice suddenly asked curiously, Don't you suspect that Gong Fan is Yun Tianyu? Why didn't he go back and look for you guys? I still can't explain this matter to this day. Could it be amnesia? Alice smiled and picked up the goblet. She drank the wine in the goblet in one gulp and finally decided to be frank. Perhaps it was the man's words that had finally touched her. The pain of losing a child. As a woman herself, she could not bear to see her flesh and blood being separated from her. Alice said, You didn't lose her memory. Hearing this, Gong Jie raised his head abruptly and glared at her. So, you admit that Gong Fan is Yun Tianyu? Yes. Alice nodded frankly. Gong Jie, you're so smart. You already have the answer in your heart. You asked me because you trust me. After so many years of friendship, I can't let you down. Gong Jie did not know whether to be happy or worried when he heard this. He was happy that Yu was still alive. What Alice said must be true. No matter what, it was a blessing in disguise that he was still alive. However, he was worried that Yu had become like this, which made him extremely heartbroken. Just the fact that he had accepted the name Gong Fan was puzzling. He has already forgotten about you. Chapter 3569. What? Gong Jie widened his eyes in disbelief. That's impossible. It's fine if he forgot about me, but how could he forget about his beloved mommy? Could it be that his brain? There's nothing wrong with his brain. The so-called memory loss is not what you think it is. Alice's expression was calm, but there was a hint of guilt in her eyes. Gong Jie did not say anything. He looked at her, waiting for her to tell him everything. Alice took a deep breath and said honestly, I hypnotized him. Hypnotized? Do you know about deep hypnosis? Gong Jie was so shocked that he was speechless. He suddenly remembered that when a person wanted to leave the Hurricane group, they would use deep hypnosis to erase all memories related to the Hurricane group. On one hand, this was to protect the interests of the Hurricane group. On the other hand, the memories related to the Hurricane group were too dark. If the person wanted to leave the group and return to a normal life, these memories would be a burden. Hence, deep hypnosis could erase a lot of memories. Such hypnosis had always been carried out secretly by Alice. Gong Jie had always known about hypnosis, but he did not know that the person who carried it out was Alice. So, you hypnotized him? Yes. How did you hypnotize him? Gong Jie asked agitatedly. Can the erased memories come back? Yes, but it's very difficult. Not only were Yu's memories erased, but his first personality also disappeared. Personality? You didn't know that Yu has two personalities? I didn't know. Alice explained. He has two personalities. One is the most innocent side, like a piece of white paper, spotless. The other is the dark side, evil like a demon. Gong Jie was stunned. So, you erased his first personality and he became like this? You can say that. Alice analyzed Yu's personality for Gong Jie. Yu's childhood was spent in happiness and darkness. The happiness was that even though he grew up in a single-parent family, Yun Shishir gave him a lot of love and companionship. However, the darkness was that Yun Na and Li Qin's insults and scoldings gave birth to the hatred in his heart. The two personalities existed independently and did not interfere with each other. Back then, when Yu dealt with Yun Na and Li Qin, the first personality did not know about it. He only vaguely knew that he seemed to have done something earth-shattering. One was innocent, the other. One was an angel, the other was a demon. Back then, when she sealed Yu's memories, her first personality was also destroyed by her second personality along with the memories. The memories, but the personality. Even if the memories were recovered, the first personality would not come back. After Yu became Gong Fan, he was completely dark. He was ruthless, black-bellied, and would do anything to achieve his goals. However, Yun Shishir was still the white moonlight in his heart. However, even Yun Shishir would not be able to awaken his first personality. There was no such thing as reviving a destroyed personality. Chapter 3570. You should be apologetic. If I didn't mention this matter, how long were you planning to hide it from me? Alice said weakly. This was your father's request. As his subordinate, I had no choice but to carry it out and keep it a secret. Now that I've told you this secret, I've already broken the rules. Gong Jie clenched his fists and trembled in anger. Why did he do that? He really could not understand. What was the meaning of Gong Shaoying doing this? He intends to use Yu to deal with Shangyu. Deal with Shangyu? Gong Jie's eyes were filled with shock. He knew that his father hated Muyaja to the core, but he did not expect him to be so cruel as to use an innocent child to deal with Shangyu. When the time comes, when Yu deals with Shangyu, he'll use this as a threat to make Yun Shishir return to the Gong family. Doesn't he think that he's being cruel? Jie, Alice said calmly. Do you think that with your father's status, he's in a high position and no one has ever dared to go against his words? In his mind, there are no rules about right or wrong. In his mind, he doesn't care who's right or wrong. No one can stop him from getting what he wants. He loves Yu, but in his mind, he doesn't think that it's a mistake for his grandson to return to the Gong family. However, if he doesn't use this method, he won't be able to keep anyone. Whether it's Yun Shishir or Yun Tianyu, he feels lonely, but other than power, he has no other means to get his daughter back. When love reached the depths in a certain aspect, this love would change its form and flavor. Gong Shaoying was wrong, but Alice understood. Gong Shaoying was hateful, but he was also pitiful. Yu is the most pitiful one, Gong Jie said. He didn't have any choice and had his memory cruelly erased by Yu. Do you know who is the most important person in his life? Alice didn't make a sound. His mother. Gong Jie continued. He regarded Shishir as more important than his own life. Erasing his memory is even more cruel than killing him. Alice was so shocked that she almost suffocated. Indeed, ever since Yu's memory was erased, he had become a completely different person. He was a true devil. If Shishir saw this, she would be very sad. Gong Jie didn't even know how to mention it to him. I want to see him. Gong Jie suddenly said. Let me see him. You can't see him. Your father protected him very well because he was worried that you would bring him back. Still, even without Gong Shaoying's interference, the current Yu may not be willing to leave with you if you want to take him away. Gong Jie smiled. I know. Then, so if I borrow you, maybe you can see him. Alice was stunned. She immediately understood what Gong Jie was referring to. I've been investigating your recent whereabouts. You disappear for a period of time in the middle of every month. I'm guessing that you must have gone to the island during this period. Alice did not say a word. Gong Jie held her hand tightly. Bring me to him, Alice. Chapter 3571. She looked up and said calmly, Okay, I'll take you there. However, you need to be prepared. At least, when you board the ship, you can't reveal that you're the crown prince of the Gong family. There were still more than 10 days until the middle of the month. Gong Jie and Mu Yaja had a video call over the ocean. When Gong Jie found out about this, he said that he had confirmed that Mu Yaja was Yu and that Alice would bring him to see him in the middle of the month. Mu Yaja expressed that he wanted to go too. Gong Jie laughed. Brother-in-law, don't joke around. You're the most dangerous person in Hurricane. You can't even get on the ship. Mu Yaja raised his eyebrows. Okay, it's fine if I don't go. However, if Xiao Yichen goes, it shouldn't be a problem. Gong Jie immediately understood what Mu Yaja meant. He frowned and thought about it carefully. I understand your plan. Okay, then I'll send Xiao Yichen to your place 3 days in advance. Okay. After ending the video call, Mu Yaja stood up from the desk. After hesitating for a long time, he finally decided to mention this matter to Yun Shishir. Yun Shishir was reading a script in the bedroom. Mu Yaja pushed the door open, gently knocked on the door, and walked into the room. When she heard the sound, she looked up. When she saw him walking in with a serious expression, she became very nervous. What happened? Mu Yaja sat on the side of the bed silently. He crossed his legs elegantly and said in a deep voice, There's something I want to tell you. However, you have to stay calm. Don't be nervous and don't get agitated. Okay? Yun Shishir laughed. Why are you so serious? What's the matter? Don't worry, I won't get agitated. Mu Yaja smiled and stroked her hair gently. Yu. Just the name that escaped from his thin lips made her face turn ghastly pale. Ever since Yu went missing, this name had become an unspeakable pain in her heart. At the mention of this name, Yun Shishir's heart ached. Why did you mention him? Yu is not dead yet. Yun Shishir couldn't react for a moment. It was only after she had a hard time separating the 5 words from each other and repeatedly comprehending them that she was stunned and suffocated. He's not dead? Yun Shishir immediately sat up and stared at Mu Yaja in disbelief. Is this true? Don't lie to me. It wasn't easy for her to pull herself out of despair. Now, she couldn't take a second blow. Mu Yaja's lips curled into a smile. Do you think I'll joke about this? Xiao Jie was the one who told me that Yu is not dead. He's not dead. Then where is he? At the Gong residence. Yun Shishir's expression froze at once. He was hidden by your father. He changed his name and disappeared without a trace. It's impossible. Yun Shishir smiled weakly. Could you be mistaken? Yu is at the Gong residence, but it's been so long. Why hasn't he returned home? He was hypnotized and lost all his memories. He even forgot his own name. Mu Yaja continued. He also forgot about you, forgot about me, forgot about Xiao Yichen, forgot about Yueyao. Yun Shishir gasped and shook her head in disbelief. I don't believe it. How could he have lost his memories? This was something that only appeared in movies, but it actually happened to her. It was unbelievable. Chapter 3572. Listen, Shishir. I'm just letting you know about this, but you have to stay calm. Don't think too much. Leave this to me. I can handle it. But Mu Yaja held her shoulders and asked seriously, Do you trust me? Yun Shishir looked into his eyes and was silent for a long time. Then, she suddenly said, Of course. You're my husband. How can I not trust you? She hugged him tightly. She didn't know whether to be happy or worried about this news. Her eyes were a little red. She was happy that Yu was still alive. As long as he was still alive, it was a blessing in disguise. However, she was worried that she didn't know when Yu would be able to come home. Yun Shishir walked into the baby's room. Yueyao was lying in the crib, fast asleep. There was a small night light above the crib. It was soft but not glaring. It shone on Yuyao's tender little face, which was as tender as white jade. Yueyao would be 2 years old in a few months' time. She wondered if Yu would be able to come home on that day. Yun Shirshir looked at Yuyao's neck. There was a necklace around her neck. It was made by Xiao Chen. During the accident, Xiao Chen had been holding tightly onto the 2 purple crystals that Yu had given him. He made 2 necklaces. One was for himself, and the other was for Yuyao's neck as a memento. After Yu's accident, Xiao Chen had matured overnight. He had transformed from his childish self into a mature big brother. Xiao Chen dreamed of Yu. Yu said to him, "When I'm not around, you have to take good care of Mommy and Yueyao." He had always engraved these words in his heart. Xiao Chen believed that Yu was definitely still alive. The telepathy between the Gemini twins told him that Yu wasn't dead, but he didn't know where he was. However, his ability was limited. He didn't know how to search, but he never gave up. Yun Shirshir smiled. "Yueyao, I remember that the first word you learned to say was brother. You really want Yu to come back, don't you?" Yuyao's eyes were tightly shut, but her pink lips were slightly curled up. She was clearly having a sweet dream. Xiao Chen stood at the door but did not enter. Instead, he quietly leaned against the door and looked at his mother, who was squatting by the crib and talking to Yueyao with a gentle expression. He smiled. Mu Yaja had already told him about this. When he found out that Yu was still alive, he was both surprised and not surprised at the same time. His daddy said that Gong Jie would bring him to see Yu in the middle of the next month. At the same time, he also gave him a very important task. Gong Jie would think of a way to bring Yu back. Xiao Chen would stay on the island as Gong Fan and replace Gong Fan for the time being. Xiao Chen gladly agreed. Even if he was trapped on the island, he still had a way to come back. However, he was more worried. If Yu was brought back, would he be able to regain his memory? Xiao Chen wasn't sure about Yu's current situation. He also didn't know if his so-called memory loss could be recovered. He only hoped that his uncle would bring Yu back to the Mu family. At least, Yun Shirshir could wake him up and help him regain his memory. "Mommy!" Xiao Chen called her softly. Yun Shirshir turned around and saw him standing at the door. She immediately wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes. "You're not asleep yet?" "Yes. I was passing by and saw that the door was open." Chapter 3573. In the middle of every month, Gong Fan would return to Ashland Island with Lisa. The medication that Alice had concocted could only last for about 30 days. She had to renew the medication every month. His sleep condition was very bad. He had insomnia, many dreams, and nightmares. His mental strength was also very weak. If not for the special sleeping pills that Alice had concocted, it would be very difficult for him to fall asleep peacefully. Other than that, his body also needed regular checkups. He returned to Ashland Island before the middle of the month. Just as he returned to the island, Lisa received a call from Alice. Alice said that she would arrive at the island early the next morning. Lisa could not help but feel a little suspicious. Originally, Alice would arrive on the 15th of every month. Tomorrow was the 12th. What was going on? Alice explained that there was a new batch of medication that had been improved and would replace the previous batch. Lisa no longer doubted him after hearing that. Before this, Xiao Chen had already disguised himself and sneaked onto the ship that was heading to Ashland Island. It would take an entire night to reach Ashland Island from the hurricane headquarters. Alice's makeup skills were top-notch. She applied makeup on Gong Jie and Xiao Chen and easily fooled them. After all, with Alice's face, she would not be put in a difficult position. She lied and said that Gong Jie and Xiao Chen were her assistants. Gong Jie was still all right. He used a wig to replace his original silver hair. This made it very difficult for people to recognize him. Xiao Chen, on the other hand, was much more aggrieved. He was not considered short for his age. He was about 1.5 meters tall, which was already considered very tall. However, it was still difficult for him to disguise himself as an adult man. Hence, Alice put on a woman's wig for him. He wore a white lab coat and put on some rouge. He was already very good-looking and had the unique aura of a young man. After a little makeup, he really looked like a young woman. After spending a night on the ship, Alice instructed him to do some things. First, if there were no accidents, Xiao Chen would have to stay on Ashland Island for a month. She would think of a way to cover for him to leave the island the next month. Gong Jie was a little worried. He was not worried that Xiao Chen's identity would be exposed. It was just that there would be no one else on the island for a month. Other than the maids, there would not even be a playmate. Given Xiao Chen's personality, would he be too lonely? Little Li Chen, on the other hand, did not mind. Even though he might have to be separated from his parents and sister for a month, he was willing to do it in exchange for Yuyu's return, even if he had to pay a heavier price than this. The ship docked at the harbor. Lisa stood at the harbor to welcome them. However, when she saw Gong Jie and Xiao Chen behind Alice, her eyes suddenly flashed fiercely. She frowned slightly, obviously sensing that something was amiss. After a moment of surprise, she did not show any suspicion. She only said in a cold tone, "Alice, you're here." In the hurricane headquarters, there was no distinction of seniority. Hence, Lisa had always called Alice by her name. Alice smiled at her. "Is he awake?" "Yes, he's awake. He's reading in the study," Lisa said. Her tone was calm and emotionless, like an emotionless machine. Xiao Chen could not help but look at her again. Chapter 3574. However, Xiao Chen could only lament and didn't reveal his emotions. He followed closely behind Alice, lowered his head, and quietly walked into the castle. Would he be able to see Yu soon? Xiao Chen suddenly felt extremely excited. When he thought of this, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. He didn't know how Yu had changed after not seeing Yu for more than a year. Had he grown taller? Was he still as skinny as before? Would he recognize him when they met? Xiao Chen clenched his fists tightly, only to feel his palms full of cold sweat. The castle was huge. As Lisa led them all the way, Xiao Chen only felt that there were endless stairs and endless corridors. Finally, after walking for a very long time, Lisa stopped in front of a door and said in a deep voice, "Young master is in his room. You can go in directly." Alice pushed open the door and walked in naturally. Gong Jie followed closely behind. Just as Xiao Chen was about to step in, he inexplicably felt Lisa's gaze on him, as if she was secretly examining him. He followed her gaze and sized her up, only to see that she was coldly sizing him up. That gaze, which seemed to be able to see through his entire body, made Xiao Chen's heart jolt violently. He had an inexplicable suspicion that Lisa might have recognized him. Lisa quickly turned her gaze away and looked out the window, as if the gaze she gave him just now was just a casual glance. Xiao Chen didn't take it to heart. He entered the room and locked the door from the inside. Alice walked into the bedroom and saw the back of a young man lying quietly on the big bed. He lay quietly on the bed with his eyes closed, as if he was still asleep. However, Gong Jie and Xiao Chen, who were standing behind her, couldn't calm down, especially when he saw the young man's extremely familiar yet pale face. Gong Jie's breathing suddenly became erratic. He walked excitedly to the bed and squatted beside it until he recognized that the child in front of him was really Yu. Yu, who had disappeared without a trace for more than a year, suddenly felt a burning sensation in his chest. It really was Yu. Xiao Chen was so excited that his entire body trembled. This voice had only appeared in his dreams for more than a year. Now that he finally saw it in real life, he couldn't even tell if this was reality or a dream. Gong Jie couldn't help but reach out and cup Yu's little face. However, the moment he touched his face, the young man on the bed suddenly woke up. He suddenly opened his cold eyes, and his pupils contracted. When he recognized the unfamiliar man in front of him, he sat up in shock and coldly swatted his hand away. There was a loud smack. He swatted Gong Jie's hand away expressionlessly and asked coldly, "Who are you?" Gong Jie was about to step forward when Alice immediately stopped him. She said to Yu, "Young master, these two are the assistants I brought over. He was taking your temperature just now." The young man frowned but didn't say anything. He only glanced at Gong Jie and Xiao Yichen cautiously. Xiao Yichen saw Yu Yu's cold and indifferent gaze land on him. He scrutinized him for a long time before he finally looked away coldly. It was obvious that he didn't pay much attention to him. At the same time, this also meant that Yu Yu had really forgotten about him. Perhaps he didn't feel anything when he was asleep. But when he woke up, Xiao Yichen suddenly realized that Yu Yu had really changed. He had become especially unfamiliar. Chapter 3575. Alice pretended to be normal as she walked over. As usual, she started a series of tests on him, including measuring his blood pressure and temperature. Yu Yu was very obedient. He allowed her to use all sorts of instruments to measure his body. However, his expression was indifferent, as if it was just a routine. Seeing that he was so calm, Alice couldn't help but ask, "Do you still have palpitations recently?" "Occasionally." He was a man of few words. If he could describe something with one word, he would definitely be stingy. He didn't speak often. Probably, other than him, no one else could live on this isolated island for a few months without breaking down. Humans were social animals. They were used to living in groups and isolated from society. Yu Yu only had Lisa by his side. However, both of them were quiet and didn't speak often. Occasionally, Lisa would deliberately talk to him, but Yu Yu would only use a few words to end the conversation. In the past, Yu Yu was naturally introverted. However, because of Yun Shirshir, he was still considered cheerful. However, under hypnosis, the second personality destroyed the first personality. As a result, the second personality completely took over. Today, Yu Yu was more like a walking corpse. Xiao Yichen's heart ached so much that he was about to suffocate. When he thought about how lonely Yu Yu had been for the past year, he felt as if a knife was being twisted in his heart. For some reason, he hated Gong Xiaoying even more. Gong Jie pulled Xiao Yichen behind him and reminded him, "Are you ready? Can you hold on for a month?" Xiao Yichen nodded and said firmly, "Uncle, don't worry. It's only a month. I can still hold on." Gong Jie said coldly, "I'm just afraid that when the time comes, you won't be able to think about Mommy and Yueyao until you cry and snot." Xiao Yichen pouted. "Can't I think about them even if I can't see them?" Alice glanced at them and suddenly took out a medicine box. She took out a syringe, opened a medicine bottle, and sucked the medicine into the syringe. According to the plan, she injected Yu Yu with tranquilizers and sleeping pills in place of the original injection. Then, she disguised him as Xiao Yichen and took him away without anyone knowing. Then, he asked Xiao Yichen to stay behind to replace Yu Yu. There were not many people on the island who were close to Yu Yu, so normally no one would notice. Even Lisa could not tell the difference between Xiao Yichen and Yu Yu. Alice held Yu Yu's arm. Just as she was about to inject him, Yu Yu caught a glimpse of the medicine bottle and was shocked to see the table of elements on the bottle. He immediately pushed her needle away. The syringe fell to the ground with a loud thud, and a few drops of medicine spilled out. Alice stared in shock. Yu Yu asked coldly, "What medicine is this?" "This is the medicine that I've been injecting you with before." Yu Yu narrowed his eyes and said mockingly, "The table of elements on the medicine bottle is not what it used to be." He was very observant. In the past, whenever Alice injected him with medicine, he would observe the table of elements on the medicine bottle. Now, the medicine that Alice was about to inject was obviously not the same medicine as before. Moreover, she had brought 2 suspicious people with her this time. In an instant, he became even more vigilant. Yu Yu suddenly opened his mouth and was about to ask Lisa to come in when Gong Jie rushed over and covered his mouth tightly. He warned, "Don't make a sound." Chapter 3576. Yu Yu sized him up coldly. He struggled fiercely, trying to break free from Gong Yichen's grip. Gong Jie saw that he was struggling fiercely, so he used his hand like a knife and slashed the back of his neck. Yu Yu's eyelids fluttered, and he fainted on the bed. Alice was dumbfounded. Xiao Yichen was so shocked that he couldn't close his mouth. He ran to the bed and carried Yu Yu. He opened his eyelids and saw that he had really fainted. He was shocked. "Uncle, you're so cruel. You're so cruel to your own nephew." Gong Jie held his forehead and said with a headache, I didn't do it on purpose. I didn't use too much strength. He won't die. He's just fainted. If you used more strength, Yu's neck would have been broken. Okay? Xiao Chen said angrily. Gong Jie was as strong as 3 adults, and he still had the cheek to say that he didn't use too much strength. If he used more strength, he would have killed him. Gong Jie cleared his throat awkwardly and said, It's good that you hit him. Maybe he'll remember who he is. He looked at Alice for confirmation, but she said coldly, No matter how much you hit him, he won't regain his memory. Gong Jie's lips twitched. Although his heart ached, there was nothing he could do. I'm worried that he'll spread the news. Okay, don't make a fuss. When he was young, he often got injured during training. He didn't suffer any injuries that were more serious than this. Xiao Chen carefully touched the back of Yu's neck. Seeing that there weren't any injuries or fractures, he was relieved. Yu had fainted. This time, he could finally do whatever he wanted. Little Ichen hugged him tightly as if he had found his lost treasure. His eyes reddened uncontrollably. Yu. Xiao Chen's heart was filled with tenderness when he finally met her after so many times in his dreams. No matter what, he had to bring Yu home. He never belonged to Hurricane. He belonged to the Mu family. He had a father, a mother, a brother, and a sister who loved him. He shouldn't be Gong Fan. He shouldn't be such a cold-blooded, demon-like war machine. Alice walked over and helped Yu lie flat on the bed. She helped him dress up, then took off Yu's clothes for Xiao Chen to change into, while Xiao Chen put on Yu's clothes. After more than a year, Yu had also developed a little and grown taller. However, compared to Xiao Chen, he was still very skinny. The clothes on his body looked very empty. After putting the wig on his head, the job was finally done. Xiao Chen, on the other hand, disguised himself as Gong Fan and lay on the bed. Based on his appearance alone, no one would be able to tell that he was a fake. Gong Jie frowned and said with disdain, Can't you act more realistically? How? Make your expression cold and your gaze fierce. Xiao Chen immediately put on a straight face. However, Gong Jie was used to seeing his warm smile. Now that he suddenly imitated Yu's expression and put on a cold face, Gong Jie couldn't get used to it. Alice said, There aren't many people on this island, so you don't have to force yourself. However, you can't give yourself away when you're facing Lisa. She's in charge of taking care of Yu for Gong Xiaoying. If you give yourself away, it'll be hard for the news to leak. When that happens, it'll be very difficult. Chapter 3577. Xiao Chen and Yu had been swapped. The swapped Yu was immediately taken away by Gong Jie. When they left, Gong Jie carried him on his back. Lisa stood at the door and saw Gong Jie carrying Yu. The guy on his shoulder had obviously fainted. She asked symbolically, What's wrong with him? Blood sickness. He had fainted. Lisa didn't probe further with such a careless explanation. She obviously didn't suspect anything either. As an assistant, how could he faint from blood sickness for no reason? That didn't make sense. She let him go easily. Gong Jie couldn't help but feel that something was amiss. He turned around and looked deeply at Alice, only to see her enter the room with a cold expression and close the door. He had a feeling that she knew about this matter. Gong Jie asked Alice, Have you communicated with Lisa about this? No, but I have a feeling that she knows. Gong Jie lowered his voice and said, I swapped Yu. Alice furrowed her brows and turned around to take a look. However, she didn't have time to think too much about it. Now's not the time to think about this. Let's get out of here quickly. Gong Jie nodded. After Gong Jie and Alice left with Yu, Lisa entered the room. Xiao Chen was initially at a loss. When he saw her enter, he frowned and pretended to be asleep on the bed. He wanted to bluff his way out of this. Lisa walked to the bedside and saw Xiao Chen lying on the bed quietly asleep. She smirked mockingly and kicked him. Xiao Chen sat up in shock and said angrily, Why did you kick me? They're gone. You don't have to pretend anymore. Pretend. Xiao Chen's heart skipped a beat, but he refused to admit it. What do you mean pretend? I don't know what you're talking about. You can understand. Lisa paused and said, Mui Chen. When Xiaoi Chen heard this, he abruptly turned his head and stared intently at her. He couldn't believe that Lisa could recognize him so easily. After all, he and Yu looked exactly the same. At first, even Mu Yaja couldn't tell them apart. Only Yun Shirshir could recognize them at first glance. How could Lisa tell at a glance that he wasn't Yu? She could even tell that he was pretending to be asleep. What a sharp gaze. Lisa pursed her lips coldly, apparently knowing what he was thinking. She said coldly, I recognized you the moment you got off the boat. Usually, Alice would only come alone. She was not allowed to bring anyone with her. However, today 2 strangers had appeared. Even though Gong Jie and Xiaoi Chen were in disguise and no one could recognize them, it didn't mean that she wasn't observant. She used to be Gong Jie's maid, so how could she not recognize him? Xiaoi Chen had the same face as Yu, so how could she not recognize him? No matter how he disguised himself, it was difficult to change his facial features. She knew very well that they were here to take Yu away. However, she turned a blind eye and did not stop them. With her ability, she was fully capable of stopping them. However, she didn't. Xiaoi Chen's heart skipped a beat. He was so nervous that he broke out in a cold sweat. He was worried that Lisa would ignore Yu if she knew about this. Lisa smiled and said, Don't worry. I'll just pretend that I don't know about this. From now on, you're Gong fan. As long as you play your role well and don't let anyone recognize you, I won't make things difficult for you. Chapter 3578. Why did she do that? Her job was to protect Yu, but in reality, she was a spy that Gong Xiaoying had placed around him to keep an eye on him. This was her job, but she didn't fulfill it. She even let Yu go on purpose. Why did she do that? There's no reason. Lisa couldn't be bothered to explain further. I'm guessing that Alice will report to Gong Xiaoying that you're unwell. You don't have to go anywhere except here. You just have to stay here quietly. Remember, don't talk too much. After she finished speaking, she turned around and left the room swiftly. Xiaoi Chen leaned against the headboard in a daze. For a moment, his mind was in a mess. When Yu woke up, he was in a high-class cabin. He sat up and realized that he was on a huge bed. Just as he sat up, he heard a man's elegant voice beside him. You're finally awake? Before you could react, Gong Jie pounced on him. He hugged his head and rubbed his face. Yu, Uncle missed you so much. Yu frowned and instinctively reached out to push him away. So disgusting. So mushy. Yu said coldly, Let go of me. However, Gong Jie didn't let go of him. Instead, he cupped his face and planted a kiss on his cheek. Get lost. Yu instinctively pushed his face away and distanced himself from him. Immediately, he reached out and rubbed the spot where Gong Jie had kissed him. His eyes were filled with disgust. Who was this man? He actually kissed him. Yu looked up angrily and glared at Gong Jie. What are you doing? Kissing my biological nephew. Biological nephew? Yu narrowed his eyes dangerously and asked suspiciously, Who are you? Gong Jie said pitifully, Yu, don't tell me you don't even recognize your biological uncle? I'm your uncle Gong Jie. Gong Jie? Yu coldly spat out 3 words. I don't know you. He wiped the spot where Gong Jie had kissed him. Then he rubbed his hand on the bedsheet forcefully. Gong Jie was traumatized when he saw this. You think I'm dirty? Yes, it's dirty, he admitted bluntly in a cold-blooded tone. Gong Jie was speechless. Gong Jie. He really wanted to beat him. In the past, he had never felt that this fellow deserved a beating. Gong Jie inched closer to him and asked angrily, You really don't recognize me? Should I know you? You Gong Jie pursed his lips and comforted him. It's okay if you don't recognize me. Anyway, it's good that you're still alive. Your mommy knows you're still alive. She's waiting for you at home. Mommy. This word actually caused a slight ripple to appear in his ice-cold heart. Even though he quickly regained his deathly stillness, only this word caused him to become slightly absent-minded. In an unfamiliar environment, he was surprisingly calm. He asked, Where are you taking me? Although the Gong Jie sitting in front of him had an overbearing aura, Yu Yu's aura was not suppressed at all. Such a thin body seemed to be brewing an extraordinary aura. It was frightening. He had really changed. Chapter 3579. Looking out of the window, Yu Yu saw the sea. He knew that he was now traveling on the sea, which was no different from a cage on the sea. It was difficult for him to escape, and he was destined to be unable to escape from this man's control. Since he was already here, he might as well take things as they came. Yu Yu lay down on the bed quietly and said coldly, "You don't have to watch over me. I can't escape anyway." Gong Jie widened his eyes in surprise. He was surprised by his calmness. However, he quickly smiled and stood up. "Have a good rest today. You'll go home tomorrow." He left the room after he finished speaking. After the door was closed, Yu Yu closed his eyes and fell asleep. At the same time, in the Mu residence, Yun Shirshir was restless. She tossed and turned in bed when she returned to her room. She could not sleep well and felt uneasy. Gong Jie sent her a message saying that he was on his way back with Yu Yu and asked her not to worry. However, she was nervous, agitated, and uneasy. She was worried about Yu Yu, but she was even more worried about Xiao Chen. Would he be lonely on the island alone? Initially, she did not agree to this plan no matter what. Yu was back, but what about Xiao Chen? Was he going to replace Yu Yu and stay on the island forever? She heard that there was nothing on the island except for a huge castle. It was almost isolated from the rest of the world. Wouldn't Xiao Chen feel lonely? Yun Shirshir's heart ached when she imagined Xiao Chen being left alone on the island. However, she also felt that it was unfair to Xiao Chen. She also felt that Mu Yaja was heartless. However, Xiao Chen said that he was only going to replace Yu Yu temporarily. It did not mean that he would never return. The most important thing now was to bring Yu Yu back and recover his memory as soon as possible. After that, everything would be easier. If Yu Yu continued to stay on the island, nothing would go smoothly in the future. Yun Shirshir reluctantly agreed. Before Xiao Chen left, Yun Shirshir hugged him to sleep for the entire night. Xiao Chen hugged her tightly because he was going to be away for a long time. He did not know when he would be back, so it was inevitable that he would miss her. Xiao Chen did not dare to stay any longer, and he left hurriedly as he was afraid that it would make her sad. Now that Yu Yu was already on his way back, she felt inexplicably uneasy. 2 days later, the ship docked. Mu Yaja and Yun Shirshir were waiting at the port in advance. When Gong Jie carried Yu Yu off the ship, Yun Shirshir saw them from afar. She and Mu Yaja went up to them excitedly. Before they even got close, tears rolled down their cheeks. Yu Yu looked at the tall and handsome man in the crowd. Her gaze was fixed on him, but she looked away coldly. However, when his gaze fell on Yun Shirshir, and he saw her red eyes looking at him with anticipation, he did not know why his heart started to beat erratically. Yu Yu was inexplicably stunned by his strange reaction. Yun Shirshir walked up to him and held his face. She looked left and right. When she saw that it was really him, she still could not believe it. She wondered if she was dreaming. It wasn't until she caressed his face that she confirmed that this wasn't a dream. Chapter 3580. Yu Yu frowned and said coldly, "You've got the wrong person." Yun Shirshir's expression froze. Mu Yaja also frowned slightly and exchanged glances with Gong Jie. Gong Jie immediately said, "He doesn't remember anything. His memories have been sealed by hypnosis." Yu Yu pursed his lips mockingly and looked away impatiently. To him, the so-called memory loss that Gong Jie mentioned was ridiculous. Memory loss? How could he have lost his memory? Who were these people and why were they saying such strange things? In fact, it could only prove that Alice's hypnosis was too successful. The fake memories that she had created had already infiltrated Yu Yu's mind. The memories that she had fabricated made Yu Yu really believe that he had grown up in the Gong family and that he was Gong Fan and not Yu Yu. Hence, to him, what Gong Jie had said was a complete lie. He would not fall for it so easily. Yun Shirshir was at a loss. The child standing in front of her had the same face as Yu Yu. Whether it was his exquisite eyes or his handsome features, they were all so familiar. In the past year, He had not appeared in her dreams countless times, but he was out of her reach. However, now that the living Yu had really returned, he was so unfamiliar. The Yu who used to pester her and call her dearest mommy seemed like he would never return. Yun Shirshir's heart was filled with disappointment. She was extremely upset as tears fell one after another onto his shoulders. She was heartbroken. Yu saw her tears and felt annoyed. He turned his face away and did not look at her. To him, whether it was Yun Shirshir, Gong Jie or Mu Yaja, they were all complete strangers. It did not matter. Yun Shirshir said with difficulty, Yu, do you really not recognize me? I've said it before. Yu finally could not take it anymore. He waved her hand away and said coldly, I've said it before. I'm not Yu. You've got the wrong person. Don't call me that again. These words were undoubtedly heart-wrenching. Yun Shirshir's heart ached as if it was being cut by a knife. She clenched her fists and held back her tears. At the side, Mu Yaja held her shoulders tightly and comforted her. Don't rush. Take it slow. Okay? Yun Shirshir asked carefully. Yu looked at her coldly and did not say anything, as if he was looking at a stranger. However, Yun Shirshir did not back away. Instead, she reached out and hugged him. His body was cold. His skin was cold as if he was born like this. His palms were cold, not as warm as Xiao Chen's. Yun Shirshir hugged him tightly. Even though Yu had become so cold when she saw him again, she was already very glad that he was still alive. It was good that he was alive. She had thought that he would never come back. She was already very grateful that her most precious family member had been found after losing him. In the car ride back, Yun Shirshir hugged Yu. Even though he was obviously resisting, she refused to let go and hugged him tighter and tighter. His body was so cold. She wanted to use her body temperature to warm him up. However, Yu was extremely uncomfortable. Seeing that he could not break free, he stopped struggling and looked out of the window without looking at her. His cold gaze made her heart palpitate. Chapter 3581. It was the third day since Yu left. Xiao Chen spent the past 3 days on the island in agony. The nutritious meals, oatmeal, fruits, and all sorts of green vegetables were all boiled once and tasteless. There was broccoli in every meal, and his eyes were about to turn green from eating. Xiao Chen felt like he was about to turn into a rabbit. Every time he sat at the dining table, he felt like he was being tortured. He ate the tasteless vegetables and felt like a rabbit who had nothing left to live for, gnawing on the broccoli resentfully. The problem was that there were so many vegetables, but where was the meat? There was no meat at all. It was no wonder that Yu had become so thin after disappearing for more than a year. God, how could he not be thin? According to Alice's explanation, it was necessary to control the intake of protein due to certain drugs. But it couldn't be that there was no protein at all, right? The worst thing was that there was no rice. The most tragic thing needed to be emphasized thrice. Xiao Chen's stomach was as big as a cow's, and he ate at least 2 bowls of rice per meal. However, there were only side dishes and no rice. Finally, after countless nutritious meals were served, Xiao Chen's body swayed and he was on the verge of collapsing. He was so hungry that he felt dizzy. Finally, with a plop, he fell head first into the plate of rice. Meat, Xiao Chen had a dream. He felt like he was looking at a huge piece of steak that had arms and legs and was running in front of him. As soon as he saw the meat, his eyes turned red. Drooling, he chased after them madly. Just as he was about to grab the meat, Lisa slapped him and woke him up. When Xiao Chen woke up, he realized that he was in Lisa's arms. He didn't know when, but his saliva had dripped onto her chest. Lisa's face turned green. She said coldly, "You can talk in your sleep?" Xiao Chen blinked in shock. He furrowed his brows and asked in confusion, "What did I just say?" Rower? Lisa said strangely, "It's a name." Xiao Chen pondered for a moment and scratched his head. I dreamt of a piece of meat running in front of me. Lisa's eyes darkened. What? Did his flesh grow legs? Could his dream be any more absurd? Xiao Chen asked, "Why did I faint?" Lisa said coldly, Low blood sugar. Low blood sugar. Xiao Yichen sobbed. I was healthy when I came here, but I've been starved to the point of hypoglycemia? Lisa rolled her eyes. Who asked you to eat so much? I haven't eaten meat in days. On the way here, because they were on the ship, the food was not very good. Originally, they thought that they would be able to eat to their heart's content. But in the end, what greeted them was green food. He was starving to the point of lovesickness. He really wanted to know how Yu had survived the past year. If he doesn't eat meat, won't Yu suffer from hypoglycemia? The medicine that Alice prescribed will help him replenish the effects he needs. It was rare for Lisa to speak so much. She glanced at him in disdain. Are you awake? Can you get up and walk? I'm starving to death. Xiao Yichen said pitifully, I want to eat meat. Do you eat human meat? Lisa asked. Xiao Yichen looked at her in disdain. She was so skinny from head to toe. What was there to eat? Chapter 3582. They looked like two small steamed buns. Xiao Yichen's face suddenly flushed red. Lisa glanced at him and looked at his expression. She then followed his gaze and it landed on her chest. No matter how stupid she was, she could tell that he was staring at her chest. Lisa's face darkened. Suddenly, she released her grip on Xiao Yichen, causing him to lose his balance and fall to the ground with a loud thud. Pervert! Lisa scolded him coldly. Stepping over him, she went back to her room. Xiao Yichen sat up from the ground and rubbed his butt in pain. Feeling wronged, he said, What? It hurts. Why wasn't she gentle at all? He saw that she was very respectful and gentle to Yu. It wasn't fair. Xiao Yichen nimbly got up from the ground and chased after Lisa. He muttered behind her, Why are you so gentle to Yu but so violent to me? Lisa rolled her eyes expressionlessly and ignored him. Hey, since I'm replacing Yu now, you should treat me as Yu too. Be gentler. Lisa suddenly stopped in her tracks and turned around calmly. She looked at him meaningfully and said in a mocking tone, Are you as smart as Yu? Are you as obedient as Yu? Yu isn't as perverted as you. As she said this, she glared coldly at Xiao Yichen and said coldly, Muichen, I'm warning you. If you stare at me again. Lisa instinctively covered her chest with her hands and said with an ashen face, Keep your eyes to yourself. If you keep looking, I'll dig your eyes out. After Lisa finished speaking, she walked away. Xiao Yichen watched her leave in shock. He couldn't help but lament, How violent! Even though Xiao Yichen was very resistant to green vegetables, he could only pretend to be calm and silently eat grass in order not to expose his identity. After 4 days, Xiao Yichen finally couldn't take it anymore. He started a hunger strike and insisted on eating meat. Lisa had no choice but to order the chef to prepare steak in the name of wanting to eat meat. At night, little Yichen lay in bed, clutching his growling stomach as he tossed and turned. He was so hungry that he could not fall asleep no matter how hard he tried. The lights suddenly came on. Lisa turned on the lights and walked in with a tray of food. At first, Xiao Yichen was sleepy and was about to fall asleep when he suddenly smelled an alluring aroma. He jumped up from the bed like a carp. He sniffed in the direction of the aroma. Lisa walked to the bed with a tray and said expressionlessly, Get up and eat. Xiao Yichen moved closer. When he saw the steak on the plate, his eyes lit up. Meat, meat. Xiao Yichen was like a heretic from a cult as he sat upright and devoutly. Lisa picked up the food from the bed and placed the tray in front of him. Like a gust of wind, he devoured the large piece of steak in a matter of minutes. Lisa was dumbfounded. She stared blankly at the knife and fork in his hand, looking as if he still wasn't hungry. She asked eagerly, Is there more? Are you a pig? Lisa said angrily, Even pigs don't eat as much as you. Xiao Yichen said pitifully, I've been hungry for a few days. This bit of meat isn't even enough to fill the gaps between my teeth. Chapter 3583. Half an hour later, Lisa walked in with another tray. Other than steak, there were cheeseburgers, ham, and sugar eggs. Lisa walked into the kitchen and told the chef, I'm still hungry. Fry another steak for me. The chef stared at her in shock. It was as though she was a mutated monster. You couldn't eat meat, and the nutritious meals were all vegetarian. They couldn't eat any protein or fat, so it would be suspicious if Xiao Chen wanted to eat meat. Hence, Lisa braced herself and said that she wanted to eat. Alas, her appetite was pitifully small and was not even 1/6 of little Ichen's. Hence, when she mentioned that she wanted to have another serving of steak, the chefs looked at her as if they had seen a ghost. Last meal. There's no more, Lisa warned. Xiao Chen nodded like he was pounding garlic. He wolfed down the steak and digested the rest of the food. Only then did he feel a little full. He was so touched that he wanted to cry. Xiao Chen licked the black pepper sauce on his knife and fork, still craving for more. Lisa sized him up coldly. This guy didn't look like an aristocrat at all. Instead, he looked like a starving refugee. The way you eat isn't elegant at all. Bad review. Xiao Chen's lips twitched. He retorted, "A full man doesn't know the suffering of a starving man. Try starving yourself." How rare. You didn't even know how to do idioms and basic arithmetic in the past. It's been a while, but you've improved. Xiao Chen said indignantly. Who says I don't know how to do arithmetic? Give me the questions and I'll show you. Lisa mocked. Do you think I'm as childish as you? Humph, I don't think you know how to do arithmetic either. Xiao Chen sized her up with contempt. Do you know how to multiply 10 by 10? Lisa looked at him with even more contempt. She asked, What's 15 multiplied by 78 and divided by 20? Xiao Chen was speechless. He was dumbfounded. This arithmetic problem wasn't something that could be solved with just fingers. The problem was that even though his arithmetic skills had improved, he still needed to use what Yu had taught him. He was far from being able to do mental arithmetic. Can you do it? 58. 5. Idiot. Xiao Chen threw himself onto the bed, feeling wronged. Lisa took the tray away and said disdainfully, Tell me, why are you and Yu twins? Why is Yu so smart and you so stupid? After saying that, she walked away as light as a feather. Xiao Chen clenched his fists in anger. He glared at her back and gritted his teeth. How infuriating. He was actually despised. Sleep. Xiao Chen lay on the bed, hugged the blanket, and closed his eyes angrily. However, Lisa's disdainful gaze kept flashing through his mind. Idiot, idiot, idiot. The demonic voice kept repeating in his ears. Xiao Chen couldn't take it anymore. He sat up and threw the pillow on the floor. You're the idiot. At the Mu residence, Yun Shirshir finished preparing dinner. She walked to the bedroom and gently knocked on the door. Yu? There was no response. Yun Shirshir opened the bedroom door and saw Yu sitting on the bed, expressionlessly looking out the window. She said gently, It's time for dinner. Yu didn't move. Even his breathing was so weak that it was almost inaudible. Chapter 3584. Seeing that he didn't respond, Yun Shirshir walked into the room and closed the door slowly. She walked over to him quietly and squatted down in front of him. However, she saw that his eyes were as still as a pool of stagnant water. There was no sign of life. Yun Shirshir's heart ached terribly. She couldn't help but lift her hand, wanting to caress his face. However, Yu narrowed his eyes and slapped her hand away in disgust. There was a loud slap. The back of her hand was slapped to the side by him. There should be a limit to your wishful thinking. Yu glanced at her coldly. Wherever his gaze landed, it was as if frost had struck. Yun Shirshir could only feel that pair of cold eyes landing on her face. Every inch of her skin was about to be frozen into ice. Every time she saw his cold expression, Yun Shirshir's heart felt like it was being stabbed. How did he become like this? Yun Shirshir bit her lip hard as tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. Because of his heartless words, her heart was extremely broken. Why are you crying? Yu said in annoyance. You only know how to cry. Even if you want to cry, don't do it in front of me. It's an eyesore. As he said this, he stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. His voice was emotionless as he said, It's time to stop acting. Yun Shirshi's heart ached as she said, Yu, I don't know why you've become like this. But I'm your mommy. Yu, Yu closed his eyes. Finally, he turned around impatiently and said coldly, Don't call me by that damn name again. Damn it. When Yun Shirshir heard this, she felt as if she had been hit hard. It was undoubtedly heart-wrenching. Yu, that was his name. He had said before that no matter what, he would never change his name or his surname. His surname was Yun, and his name was Tianyu. His surname was Yun, and his name was Yu. This was the name his mommy had given him, and he cherished it very much. But now, Yu was coldly saying that it was a damn name. Yun Shirshir felt as if a knife was being twisted in her heart. Yaya? Outside the door, a childish voice suddenly sounded. Yun Shirshir looked up and saw that the door was suddenly opened from the outside. Mu Yaja was standing at the door, holding the pink little Yueyao in his arms. Gong Jie said softly beside him, Yueyao kept calling for her brother? Mu Yaja walked in with Yueyao in his arms. When the little Yueyao saw Yun Shirshir, she immediately opened her arms and babbled, asking for a hug. Yun Shirshir took Yueyao from Mu Yaja's arms. She gently held her little hand and kissed her forehead. She said to her, Yes, brother is back. Brother is back. Yueyao followed her gaze and looked at the figure by the bed. Her gaze suddenly froze. Brother. Her young and tender voice was filled with childishness. It was clear and melodious like a wind chime, tinkling and extremely pleasing to the ear. Yu looked back and saw the little fellow in Yun Shirshir's arms. Her skin was as white as snow, and her eyes were big and watery. Her eyelashes were long and curly. Even though she was only 2 years old, her eyebrows were already beginning to take shape. Her facial features were actually somewhat similar to his. He couldn't help but be stunned. Yueyao suddenly stretched out her little hand, raised a finger, and pointed at him. She looked up at Yun Shirshir and opened her little mouth. Brother. Yun Shirshir's eyes couldn't help but sting. She immediately said, Yes, it's brother. It's brother? She still remembered. Chapter 3585. When Yueyao saw Yun Shirshir's affirmation, she felt greatly encouraged. She was so excited that she babbled and struggled to get down. Yun Shirshir squatted down and placed her on the ground. Yueyao took a step forward and suddenly lost her balance. She fell hard on the ground. However, she didn't seem to feel pain. She clumsily stuck out her butt and got up from the ground. She opened her small hands and walked unsteadily towards Yu. She was wearing the squeaky shoes that Mu Yaja had bought. When she walked, every step she took would make a squeaking sound and shine. In the beginning, Yueyao didn't like to walk. She kept pestering Yun Shirshir to carry her. After Yun Shirshir was done carrying her, she would let Xiaoyichen carry her, followed by her daddy. When they went out, they would always carry her in their arms. Even when she was old enough to walk, she didn't like to jump around on the ground. She was extremely quiet. Hence, Mu Yaja bought many pairs of such shoes. The little girl found it extremely novel. Every time she took a step, she would squeak. Hence, she started to walk more diligently. Even though she wasn't walking very smoothly, it was considered very smooth. Little Yueyao walked to Yu's side. Seeing that she was about to trip, she hugged Yu's leg tightly and sat on the ground. She hugged Yu like a lazy koala bear. She looked up and smiled foolishly at him. This smile was as if all 3,000 worlds were shining brightly. When she smiled, her 2 front teeth were as cute as a rabbit's. She was mischievous and cute. Yueyao squeaked, Brother. She spoke fluently and clearly. Yu understood her immediately. He turned his face away awkwardly and didn't look at her. Seeing that Yu was ignoring her, Yueyao couldn't help but feel aggrieved. She tugged at Yu's trousers with her 2 little hands. She even wanted to climb up Yu's trousers. She really looked like a koala bear. Just as Yun Shirshir revealed a gratified smile, she saw Yu take a step back and avoid Yueyao. Yueyao lost her balance and fell to the ground. She sat up and instantly felt unhappy. Her entire little face scrunched up as if she had suffered a great grievance. Brother? She felt so aggrieved that 2 silver beads appeared at the corners of her eyes. She pursed her lips but held it in. When Yun Shirshir saw this, she immediately walked over and wanted to carry Yueyao. However, Yueyao pushed her away. Even though she was only 2 years old, she had inherited Mu Yaja's stubbornness and aloofness. She stubbornly refused to be carried by Yun Shirshir. She stood up again and staggered towards Yu Yu. Yu Yu widened his eyes in surprise. However, he saw that she had already walked in front of him and was hugging him like a koala bear. Her eyes were full of attachment. "Brother." Yueyao held back her tears stubbornly and refused to let go. She wanted him to carry her. Yu Yu remained unmoved, but his eyes were flickering fiercely. He turned his face away and didn't look at her anymore. After a long silence, he said word by word, "I'm not your brother." Yueyao widened her eyes. Obviously, she didn't understand what he said. However, when she saw his resolute expression, she couldn't hold back her aggrieved emotions any longer. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Boo-hoo!" Yueyao hugged his leg and cried pitifully. Chapter 3586. You used to like her a lot. You kept hugging her and teaching her how to call you brother. Now that she's learned it, you're ignoring her when she calls you that. Yueyao pouted pitifully. She cried as she said, "Brother is ignoring her. Brother is ignoring her." Yu Yu turned around expressionlessly and said coldly, "I'm not interested in playing house with you. So get lost." Yu Yu turned around coldly and sat back on the bed like an ice sculpture. Yun Shirshir carried Yueyao, sighed, and left. The door closed softly. Yu Yu looked back slightly and glanced at the door. His eyes were cold, but there was a flash of absent-mindedness in the depths of his eyes. Yueyao's teary eyes appeared in his mind and his thoughts became even more chaotic. He fell on the bed, covered himself with the blanket, and closed his eyes. Outside the door, Mu Yaja and Gong Jie looked at Yun Shirshir's disappointed and gloomy face. They looked at each other. Gong Jie said, "Shirshir, don't worry. You didn't mean what he said. He doesn't remember you, and he doesn't remember Yueyao either. It's understandable that he treats you as an enemy." Mu Yaja agreed with Gong Jie and said comfortingly, "Take it slow. What if?" Yun Shirshir said worriedly. "What if he can't remember me for the rest of his life?" "Don't be so pessimistic," Gong Jie said with a headache. "Compared to you, I'm more worried about you." He was worried that she would be disappointed, despaired, upset, and unable to recover from this setback. Yun Shirshir shook her head and said calmly, "No, I won't. I will become stronger. At this time, Yu needs me more. Xiao Jie, don't worry." She smiled at him. Gong Jie took Yueyao from her arms. Seeing that she was still sulking with tears hanging from the corners of her eyes, he kissed the corner of her eyes and coaxed, "Yueyao, don't cry. Uncle will carry you." "Uncle." Yueyao threw herself into his arms and wrapped her arms around his neck. Gong Jie was overjoyed. It was rare for Yueyao to be so close to him. She took the initiative to wrap her arms around his neck. He couldn't help but kiss her again and again. He couldn't bear to part with her. Mu Yaja said coldly, "If you like it so much, give birth to one yourself." Gong Jie snorted. "No, I love Yueyao the most." As he spoke, he subconsciously shielded her, worried that Mu Yaja would snatch Yueyao from his arms. When Yun Shirshir saw these two clowns, her mood finally recovered a little. It was as if sunlight had shone into her heart. It didn't matter. It didn't matter that Yu didn't remember her. She would try her best to make him remember her. It was late at night. Yu lay in bed. Even though he hadn't eaten for a day, he didn't feel hungry. He always carried the medicine that Alice had concocted with him. To a certain extent, these medicines would make him feel full and replenish his various bodily functions. He looked at the ceiling. There was no emotion in his cold eyes. Suddenly, footsteps came from outside the door. Following that, there was a long silence. It seemed that the person hesitated for a long time. Finally, she took the doorknob and pushed the door open. In the darkness, the footsteps slowly walked in. Yu's handsome brows were slightly raised. He closed his eyes but didn't close them tightly. Through the gaps of his eyes, he saw a slender figure slowly walk to his bedside and sit on the edge of the bed quietly. "You?" A fair hand slowly caressed his cheek and tucked his hair behind his ear. Chapter 3587. Yu did not say a word and pretended to be asleep. Yun Shirshir looked at him quietly. She could not wait to make up for the yearning she had for him over the past year through this one look. This one look felt like 10,000 years. She could not help but recall how he looked when he was just born. His wrinkled little face was red. After being rescued and returned to the incubator, he looked so weak that it was as if he would leave her at any time. She had just gone through childbirth, but she still insisted on visiting him every hour with Yun Yeching's help. In the beginning, she was weak, but later on, she slowly regained some vitality. Her two small hands began to wave and grasp the air. Her legs also began to kick. The first time she took him out of the incubator to feed him, he was born prematurely at 8 months. He was so small that he was as light as a feather. She still remembered the first time he opened his eyes. Those jet-black eyes were like inlaid agates, filled with a lively luster. He opened his eyes and smiled at her, revealing his pink gums. The first time he said, "Mommy," was inadvertently when she was busy tripping rice noodles for him. The little guy was playing with his toys when he suddenly said, "Mommy." She turned around in surprise and walked up to him. She asked him to say it again, but he only cared about his toys and smiled at her foolishly. He did not say it again. However, Yun Shirshir was still so excited that she could not calm herself down. God knew how long she had been waiting for this sentence. Every time she taught him how to pronounce it, she would exaggeratedly open her mouth and he would be amused by her. Gradually, he grew up and became more mischievous. However, at this time, his body was still weak and he often had to go to the hospital. Thus, throughout the year, the empty ward had become his permanent base. She remembered one time when he was very active and rolled down from the hospital bed. She was so shocked that she rushed over and picked him up. He cried out loud in pain. He rarely cried. Even when he was injected, he was so stubborn that he did not shed a single tear. This fall, however, he cried and hugged her tightly. She coaxed him for a while before he finally stopped crying. He grabbed her clothes and quietly fell asleep. It wasn't until he was 5 years old that his physical condition gradually stabilized. She liked to take him to the park for a walk. Every time she came back at noon, he would obediently prepare lunch and wait for her to come and have lunch together. He didn't know how to cook from the very beginning. At first, when he learned how to cook, the fried rice turned into a black paste. She was so angry that she scolded him and told him not to go into the kitchen without permission. It wasn't because the food he made wasn't delicious, but she was worried that he would cut his hand with a knife at such a young age. What if he accidentally caught fire? She didn't dare imagine what would happen. However, Yu's talent in cooking seemed to be innate. As time passed, the food she cooked became more and more delicious. From Chinese food to Western food to Japanese food to Italian food, it was all very easy for him. She was touched, but her heart ached at the same time. Even if the Yu who knew how to dote on mommy, the Yu who knew how to do housework, the Yu who knew how to cook, the Yu who knew how to do housework, the Yu who knew how to cook, and the Yu who was very, very capable never came back, it's fine. Chapter 3588. Yun Shirshir hugged his shoulders and her tears fell uncontrollably onto his face. Whether you remember it or not, you'll always be mommy's Yu. Mommy really misses you. Really, really misses you. It's mommy's fault. Mommy didn't protect you well. No matter how harsh or heartless you are, mommy won't blame you. But don't leave mommy again. Boiling hot tears continuously dripped onto his cheeks and rolled down his cheeks endlessly. She held his face in her hands and gently kissed his forehead. Her tears fell straight onto his eyelashes, slid through his eyes, and trickled down from the corners of his eyes. Yu could only feel his vision becoming blurry. Her tears seemed to flow from her eyes and into his heart. His heart tightened and convulsed inexplicably. He felt as if he was going to suffocate and turn the world upside down. Why was she crying? Don't cry. Her tears made his heart feel like it was going to explode. Why did her tears cause him to lose control of himself? Hearing her sobbing, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his heart, as if it was going to pierce through his heart. What was going on? What exactly was going on? Yu suddenly felt a sharp pain in his head. His heart was in a mess and he couldn't help but frown. When he came back to his senses, he felt Yun Shirshir's body stiffen. He then realized that his arms had unknowingly wrapped around her shoulders. It was as if he had lost control and hugged her uncontrollably. Yu was so shocked that he pushed her away and sat up on the bed. Although he tried to hide it, he couldn't hide the embarrassment that he was showing at this moment. Yun Shirshir came back to her senses and stared at him in disbelief. Yu's breathing quickened. He stared at her warily and leaned his back against the bed. He said coldly, "Are you done crying?" Yun Shirshir was stunned. His change was so sudden that she was not mentally prepared. When he hugged her just now, she really thought that Yu was back. However, it was just a moment of joy before everything returned to normal. Yu said coldly, "You don't have to show such an expression." He turned his head and looked out the window, deliberately not looking at her lamenting expression. "Yu, do you know why I call you Yu?" Yun Shirshir said, "When you were born prematurely and almost died. I'm glad that God's blessing. You are the best gift to me. That's why I named you Yun Tianyu." Ha! How interesting. I'll say this one last time. My name is Gong Fan, not Yun Tianyu. As he said that, his head was suddenly felt. He was in pain. The pain, Yu. She asked worriedly, "What's wrong? Do you have a headache?" She rushed out of the door in a hurry, found the medicine box, and rummaged through it. Finally, she found the painkillers. Carrying a glass of water, she walked into the room and passed it to him. "This is a painkiller. Take it, and your head won't hurt anymore." Enough! Yu had a splitting headache and was extremely irritated. The berserk factor in his body was fermenting. He flung her hand away. "Go away." Chapter 3589. The sudden movement caused the two of them to freeze. Yu stared at the shattered glass on the floor, feeling inexplicably frustrated. Yun Shirshir lowered her head and stared at the shattered glass. For a moment, she couldn't figure out whether it was the glass that had shattered or her heart. Yun Shirshir pursed her lips as tears rolled down her cheeks. Suddenly, she knelt down on one knee and picked up the shattered glass pieces. "Mommy, in the future, let's use the same glass as a family of 4. Okay?" She could still remember how Yu had excitedly brought 5 glasses to Yao not long after she was born. 3 of the glasses had adorable suns on them, while the other 2 had beautiful moons on them. Yu had said that his daddy, Xiaoyi Chen, and he were the suns that protected the moons and gave them warmth. The moons were bright because of the suns. Gong Jie even threw a tantrum at one point, displeased that none of the 5 cups belonged to him. However, Yu had muttered, "You're a married uncle, and you're a spilled bucket of water. It's not yours." He had carefully placed the 5 glasses on the rack and marked them separately. Her tears continued to drip onto the carpet, staining it. She picked up the shattered glass pieces bit by bit until her gaze fell on the suns. Suddenly, her fingertips started to tremble uncontrollably. In a moment of carelessness, she accidentally cut her fingertips. A drop of blood appeared on the wound. However, she didn't feel the pain at all. She held the shattered glass pieces in her hands as her sad tears fell silently. When Yu saw this, especially when he saw Yun Shirshir's tear-stained face, he couldn't help but grip the bedsheets tightly. The bedsheets were crumpled into a ball, just like his inner world at that moment. "Stop picking them up." Little did he know that the moment he finished speaking, Yun Shirshir's tears fell even more violently and she started to sob. Yu frowned again. He felt a headache coming on when he heard her crying. He held his forehead and looked helplessly at Yun Shirshir, who was squatting by the bed and holding back her tears. He didn't know what to do with her. In fact, you already knew why Alice came to the island. You also recognized Gong Jie and me. The sea breeze on the island blew gently. Xiaoyi Chen put on a jacket and sat on the beach. The bright moon seemed to be half submerged in the sea, but it also seemed to be rising from the sea. It was a beautiful sight, Lisa stood beside him and looked at the moon that seemed to be immersed in the sea. It was as if the sea water was the tears of the moon that had gathered to form the sea. She didn't say anything. She sat down beside Xiao Chen and gazed at the distant horizon. Her lips twitched as she said, "I work for young Master Jie. How could I not recognize him?" Xiao Chen turned to look at her in surprise. "So, you did it on purpose?" "On purpose." Lisa smiled. "What do you mean on purpose? You knew that you and I were swapped, but you still allowed Gong Jie to take you away." Lisa didn't say anything, but it was a silent admission. "Why?" Xiao Chen didn't understand. "Isn't your mission and duty to take care of Yu? If he was taken away, it means that you didn't fulfill your duty. Aren't you worried that Gong Xiaoying will hold you accountable?" Lisa didn't answer. Instead, she asked, "Do you know what faith is?" Chapter 3590. "What do you believe in?" Xiao Chen asked. Lisa looked at the moon and narrowed her eyes. She said mockingly, "Belief? I don't have any." Ever since she could remember, her family had been destroyed and her family had died. She and hundreds of other war orphans like her had been brought to Atlanta Island. On Atlanta Island, there was a fearsome assassin organization. Every year, they would recruit war orphans or refugees of different skin colors, ages, and genders from all over the world. Hundreds of children were locked up in a huge cage. They were only given a bowl of rice and a glass of water. Hundreds of children were only given a bowl of rice and a glass of water. Every child was hungry. What did this mean? This meant that even if they wanted to eat a mouthful of rice, they would have to face hundreds of children fighting each other. If they were hungry, they would only be given a bowl of rice. If they were thirsty, they would have a glass of water. In order to fill their stomachs and survive, the children would start to fight each other. Some were born weak and unwilling to fight. In the end, they could only starve to death. Most of the children would fight with their lives. Everyone wanted to live. No one was an exception. She was the same. At that time, her belief was that she did not want to go hungry. In the beginning, she was unable to recover from the setback. She was weak and could not compete with the children who formed cliques. However, hunger was like a beast. Once hungry, the primitive hunting instinct in her body would be fully activated. She started to fight and snatch, gradually from a mouthful of water to a mouthful of rice, until she could snatch half a bowl of rice and half a glass of water. Gradually, many children starved to death. Corpses were constantly being dragged away from the cage. However, the other children did not dare to leave the cage. They were like livestock in captivity. Later, a bowl of rice became half a bowl of rice, and a glass of water became half a glass of water. Eventually, they stopped eating and drinking. At that time, many children had already gone crazy. They were all brought from war-torn lands. Some were even natives. They did not have the concept of law and did not have the principle of killing or not killing. They only wanted to live. When they were hungry and uncomfortable, they wanted to eat. When there was no food, even if they gnawed the flesh of a living person, they would still devour it. Children who were unwilling to eat became living prey. At this time, it was necessary to resist those children who formed cliques. In the end, Lisa and the other children survived, but at that time, all the children were on the verge of death. She was not surprised. The moment she crawled out of the rope, she naively thought, was she finally free? The belief then was to live in this warm sunshine. However, after the children were brought out, they were immediately sent to the next round of devil training. The so-called devil training was hellish. The weak would die and the strong would survive. Perhaps, in the end, there would only be one person who could survive all the trials. Lisa was the only child who survived during that period. However, after the cruel competition, she didn't even have a basic belief. It was precisely because he had no faith that his heart ached for Yu. After the first personality was destroyed by the second personality, it became Gong Fan's Yu. It was like a numb and cruel zombie. It had no feelings, no beliefs, and no goals. Empty ambition. Chapter 3591. When she had first met Yu, this child was so special. On one hand, he was ruthless and unscrupulous. On the other hand, He was as warm as ever, just like the bright and beautiful sun shining on one's heart. However, this warmth was only vividly displayed in front of Yun Shirshir. At that time, Yu was loved, knew how to love and enjoy being loved. He was blissful. Now Yu was sitting there, but he was as empty as a painting. He was still as if there was no trace of life in him. She knew very well that Yu was not happy at all. Therefore, she had deliberately let Yu go. At least, when Yu was brought back to the Mu family, there would be people who would love and protect him. They would not bear to use him. Now, her belief was that her little master would be able to smile from the bottom of his heart like he did in the past. Xiao Chen took a deep look at Lisa. It was as if something in his heart had been deeply touched. Yun Shirshir hugged the broken shards. Her tears kept falling onto the carpet and her lips were trembling. She did not even notice that the shards had cut her palms and blood was seeping out. Yu casually switched on the wall lamp and saw the tears on her face clearly. At that moment, he did not know what to do. In the past, he had never felt so helpless. Now that he was faced with such a sad woman, it was as if there was an invisible hand mercilessly tearing his heart into pieces. He suddenly blurted out, "All right, don't cry." However, Yun Shirshir was unmoved. When she thought of the 5 cups that Yu had bought and one of them was missing, she was so sad that tears kept falling. "Don't cry." Yu threw the table lamp on the floor in frustration. He did not know how to stop her tears, let alone how to comfort her. He only knew that when he saw her tears, his heart would also hurt. When he saw her sad, he would also feel very sad. Yun Shirshir looked up and saw Yu's impatient expression. She then stood up and left with the shards in her arms. Not long after, she came back in again. Wearing gloves and a vacuum cleaner, she cleaned up all the shards on the carpet. You should sleep early." After Yun Shirshir finished speaking, she awkwardly wiped her tears and left the room. Yu looked in the direction of the closed door. She could not help but feel a little dazed. He lay down on the bed, but he could no longer fall asleep. He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. No matter what, it was difficult for him to fall asleep. He suddenly sat up and got off the bed. He opened the door and walked to the living room. This was the first time he walked out of his room since he returned to the Mu family. On the table in the living room, there were a few pieces of paper towels. On the paper towels, there were a few pieces that formed a sun. Yun Shirshir couldn't bear to throw it away, so she pieced the pieces together. Yu glanced at it and his heart seemed to be in turmoil. He turned around and looked around. Suddenly, he saw a few white blankets on the cupboard beside the table. He frowned and walked over as if he was possessed by gods and demons. Yu took the quilts and walked into the room. He sat in front of the study table and casually opened the drawer. There were a few boxes of paints in the drawer. He squeezed the paints into the palette, picked up a pen and dipped it in the paints. Then, he slowly drew a circle on the surface of the empty cup. Yu suddenly realized that he was doing something childish. He frowned and put the cup on the table with a look of disgust. He turned around and was about to go to bed. Chapter 3592. In his mind, he couldn't help but recall Yun Shirshir's misty, teary eyes. His heart was in a mess. Yu looked at the cup on the table and hesitated. Finally, he sat back down. The next day, Yun Shirshir walked to the room door and knocked gently. But there was no response. She pushed the door open and walked in. She saw Yu wrapped in the blanket on the bed, still sleeping. She walked to the bedside quietly. She was worried that she would wake him up, so her footsteps were light and slow. As she walked past the study table, her gaze was attracted by a cup on the table. Yun Shirshir followed his gaze. She remembered that this cup was used to serve guests. Why was it placed here? She casually picked up the cup, but from the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of the neatly packed paints and brushes, as well as the unwashed color palette. She couldn't help but be startled, and slowly turned the cup over. On the other side, there was an exquisite simple drawing on the white surface of the cup. There was a small sun drawn on the cup. Although the strokes were simple, the drawing was exquisite. It was exactly the same as the sun on the cup that Yu had bought previously. Yun Shirshir's heart skipped a beat. This was This was drawn by Yu. It was unbelievable. Yun Shirshir looked at the bed. Yu was still sleeping. He was curled up under the blanket and sleeping soundly. Her gaze fell on the cup again. The sun on the cup had been drawn for a long time and the paint had dried up. She felt warmth in her heart, as if the sun was shining on her. This was drawn by Yu. Could it be that he had drawn a new cup because he had accidentally broken the cup yesterday? Yun Shirshir was extremely touched at this thought. She held the cup lovingly. She left the room with the cup in her arms. In the living room, Wuxia was cleaning up the table. When he woke up in the morning, he saw the broken cup on the table. Yun Shirshir pieced the sun together. He knew in his heart that Yu must have upset him again last night. Yun Shirshir had always treated this cup like a treasure. During that period of time, she had always held this cup. This cup had accompanied her through the most torturous period of her life. However, now that it was broken, it was natural for her to be upset. For the entire morning, she was in low spirits and her eyes were swollen. It was obvious that she had cried a lot last night. When Yun Shirshir walked into the living room with a cup drawn by Yu, she raised the cup in front of Wuxia as if she was presenting a treasure. She smiled and said, "Look, this was drawn by Yu." Wuxia couldn't help but be surprised. He took the cup from her hand. Yun Shirshir was still worried as she reminded him, "Be careful. Don't drop it." "It won't drop." Wuxia comforted her. His gaze fell on the cup, but he smiled and said, "One look and I can tell that it was drawn by that little thing. Do you think that Yu drew this cup because he saw me sad? So, that's probably it. Although he has lost his memories, there are some feelings in his bones that can't be cut off." Wuxia comforted her and said, "Don't worry and don't be too anxious. Take it slow. His memories will slowly recover." Yun Shirshir was also encouraged. She nodded vigorously as hope ignited in her heart. Initially, she had thought that there was no hope for Yu to recover his memories. Chapter 3593. On the fourth day of Yu's return to the Mu family, he finally started to eat. Yun Shirshir personally cooked a bowl of noodles. She wasn't a good cook, but in the past year or so when Yu wasn't around, she started to study her culinary skills. She started from recipes and attended some culinary training classes. Gradually, she was able to take charge of the kitchen. She brought the bowl of noodles into the room. Yu was sitting on the bed, flipping through the books on the bookshelf. When he saw her walk in, he put the books back into the bookshelf with an indifferent look on his face. Yun Shirshir smiled and placed the bowl of noodles on the table. She said to him, "Yu, eat something. If you don't eat, you'll starve." When Yu heard this, he turned his face away. However, his attitude was no longer as repulsive as before. Instead, he said indifferently, "I don't want to eat. You haven't eaten for 4 days." Yun Shirshir pleaded, "Eat something, okay? Mommy will feed you." She paused for a moment. Worried that he would resist, she changed the way she addressed him. "I'll feed you." Yu sat in front of the study table and looked at her steadily. He didn't reject her, but he didn't agree either. Yun Shirshir walked over to him tentatively. She moved a chair over and sat in front of him. With one hand, she used a fork to roll up the noodles and put it in his mouth. Yu looked at her expressionlessly. Suddenly, he opened his small mouth. Yun Shirshir was overjoyed when she saw this. However, she didn't dare to show her happiness on her face. She suppressed her excitement and fed him. It wasn't until he swallowed the mouthful of noodles that she believed that he was willing to eat. If he was willing to eat, it was a huge breakthrough. She couldn't help but feel touched. She persuaded him again, "Eat another mouthful, okay?" Yu still felt awkward and didn't say anything. He just stared at the noodles in her hand. The noodles she cooked weren't that amazing, but perhaps he was really hungry. He actually felt that this bowl of noodles was very fragrant. Yun Shirshir tried to feed him another mouthful of noodles, and he obediently opened his mouth and took another mouthful. When she saw it, she was so moved that she wanted to cry. The fact that he could eat was something she had never thought of. She even thought that if he was still unwilling to eat, she would really be at her wit's end. At that time, she would have no choice but to forcibly inject him with a nutrient solution. Now that he was willing to eat, Yoon Shirshir was greatly gratified. After what happened last night, the little fellow was no longer so resistant. The little guy finished the bowl full of noodles. Yoon Shirshir tried to feed him a few mouthfuls of soup, and Yu drank it obediently. As long as she fed him, he would no longer refuse. When Yoon Shirshir walked out of the room with the empty bowl, Gong Jie came over. When he saw the empty bowl, he was a little suspicious. Is he willing to eat? Yoon Shirshir nodded agitatedly. Yes, this bowl of noodles was all eaten by him. Oh my God. Gong Jie widened his eyes in disbelief. He's finally willing to eat. It's just that his attitude towards me is still so cold. When he opened his mouth to eat the noodles, she even suspected that he had finally regained his memory. However, when she took the bowl of noodles and left the room, his back was still facing her coldly. He didn't even look at her once. She then realized that if he had really regained his memory, you wouldn't treat her so coldly. Chapter 3594. At night, when Yoon Shirshir finished cooking the noodles, Gong Jie volunteered to bring it into the room. Yoon Shirshir was a little hesitant, but Gong Jie said coquettishly, Shirshir, let me, as your uncle, perform a little. All right. Gong Jie took the bowl of noodles from her hands. Yoon Shirshir cautioned him carefully, be careful, it's hot. Hence, Gong Jie carried the bowl of noodles into the room. However, within a few minutes, the sound of porcelain shattering could be heard from the room. Yoon Shirshir and Mu Yaja heard the commotion and stood up in shock. They rushed into the room, only to see Gong Jie standing at the side with a stunned expression. Yu was sitting on the bed, and the floor was littered with broken bowls and soup. It was a complete mess. Gong Jie turned his head innocently and glanced at Yoon Shirshir bitterly. He mouthed, Yu is so fierce. It turned out that when he carried the bowl of noodles into the room, Yu heard the door open and thought that it was Yoon Shirshir. He sat up on the bed and saw that it was Gong Jie. When he carried the bowl of noodles in front of him and was about to feed him, Yu waved his hand coldly and knocked the bowl of noodles out of his hand onto the floor. After Yoon Shirshir cleaned up the mess on the floor, the three of them left the room. Gong Jie looked sad and lonely. Why did he knock over your bowl of noodles? Yoon Shirshir found it unbelievable. What did you say? Gong Jie said sadly. I just brought it in and didn't say anything, but he knocked over my bowl of noodles. As he said this, he crossed his arms and said angrily, That's too much. How could it be? Mu Yaja said, Maybe it's because you're not likable as an uncle. Gong Jie was speechless. He was speechless. He said provocatively, Brother-in-law, that means you're very confident. That kid must have knocked over the bowl of noodles that you brought in. Mu Yaja said confidently, How is that possible? That is my son. Gong Jie said, Try it then. I'll give it a try then. Mu Yaja cooked the noodles and brought them in. Gong Jie stood at the door and started counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2. Before he could count to 1, the sound of porcelain being overturned came from the room again. Gong Jie and Yoon Shirshir walked in and saw Mu Yaja standing beside the bed with an ashen face. The floor was also in a mess. Yu sat on the bed with an unapproachable posture. His face was as cold as ever. Poochie? Gong Jie covered his mouth and held back his laughter. He had a smug expression on his face that said, I was right, wasn't I? Mu Yaja glared at him. Gong Jie glared back at him indignantly. Yoon Shirshir immediately said to Gong Jie, Go out first. Sister, go out. Gong Jie left the room feeling wronged. Yoon Shirshir then said to Mu Yaja, You go out too. Mu Yaja looked like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. Instead, he left the room. Yoon Shirshir cleaned up the mess on the floor, cooked another bowl of noodles, and brought it into the room. In fact, she was feeling a little nervous. In the afternoon, Yu was willing to eat. Perhaps he was really starving. She didn't know if there would be a second time. Yoon Shirshir carefully inched closer to the bedside. Yu, who was leaning against the headboard, stared at her expressionlessly with a cold look on his face. She probed, "Eat something, okay?" Yu didn't say a word and just looked at her silently. Chapter 3595. The noodles have just been cooked and are still warm. As she said this, she lifted a mouthful of noodles and cautiously brought it to his mouth. Yu's gaze fell on the bowl of noodles and he suddenly raised his hand. Yun Shirshir thought that he was going to knock the bowl over and instinctively retracted her hand. However, she saw him suddenly straighten the bowl of noodles. It turned out that her bowl of noodles was tilted to one side and was about to spill out. Yun Shirshir's anxious heart then calmed down a little. However, she saw that Yu obediently ate a mouthful of noodles and didn't show any signs of resistance. She was so excited that her hands were trembling. She had never expected that Yu would really accept her. If it weren't for Wuxia and Gongjie, she would have thought that Yu was only eating because he was hungry. However, when Gongjie and Wuxia came in, Yu had knocked over the bowls in their hands. However, when she fed him, he didn't show any signs of resistance. Instead, he obediently ate a mouthful of noodles. Had he accepted her from the bottom of his heart? Yun Shirshir was greatly encouraged. Even though he still didn't say anything and still looked cold, he didn't even look at her. However, his willingness to eat what she fed him made Yun Shirshir's originally gloomy heart gradually brighten up. Halfway through the noodles, he lowered his head and refused to eat anymore. Yun Shirshir persuaded again. Yu, eat another mouthful. If you only eat this little, you'll be hungry at night." Yu looked at her deeply. After a long time, he finally relented and ate another mouthful. When he finished the noodles, Yun Shirshir asked him if he wanted some soup. He shook his head. However, she looked very surprised. Wouldn't he choke if he only ate noodles? However, she was already very touched when he finished the noodles, so she didn't ask for more. When she was about to clear the bowl, she asked, "Is it good?" Initially, she thought that he would remain silent like before. However, Yu suddenly opened his mouth and said coldly, "It tastes awful." Yun Shirshir was shocked. She picked up the bowl and drank a mouthful of soup. It was so salty that she frowned. So salty? How could he eat it? Yun Shirshir felt a little guilty. It took a lot of willpower for him to finish all the noodles that tasted so bad. She could not help but laugh. She looked at Yu and said in embarrassment, "It's so disgusting. It must have been hard on you." Yu looked at her and smiled. She was stunned. When she smiled, she was very beautiful and charming. Especially, it made him feel an inexplicable warmth. It was like the most difficult sunlight in winter. His cold and stiff lips couldn't help but relax a little. However, when Yun Shirshir looked at him again, he resumed his cold expression. He looked away and didn't want to look at her again. When Yun Shirshir walked out with the bowl of noodles, Wuxia and Gongjie gathered around. When they saw that there was only soup left in the bowl, they were so shocked that they couldn't close their mouths. "He ate it all?" "Yeah." Gongjie immediately said unhappily, "That's not fair. Why did this fellow knock over our bowls when brother-in-law and I brought the noodles in?" Wuxia couldn't hold it in anymore. He glared at him and said, "Shut up." Gongjie said, "That's the truth." Wuxia changed the topic. "In any case, it's a good thing that he's willing to eat no matter who feeds him." Yun Shirshir nodded. There were tears in her eyes. She immediately wiped them away with her fingers and smiled. This meant that Yu had started to accept her. This was indeed an amazing breakthrough.